Let me start by introducing myself, Alexander Lambsdorff. I'm the deputy leader of the Liberal group of the European Parliament. As you know, freedom of expression is a topic that is extremely important to liberals around the world, which is why we have decided to prioritize this subject, to make it an important subject for our work in this 7th European Parliament. I'm very happy that we could gather today a group of people who have experienced personally limitations to freedoms of expression, because while we may take it for granted, it is not a given that freedom of expression is safe and sound, unabetted all across Europe. Let me also make a short technical remark. My native language is German, und wenn ich jetzt Deutsch spreche, then that means that you will have to grab your earphones here, these things. And if you want to listen to interventions in German or French in the English language, you would have to go to channel 2. If you want to listen to everything in German, you go to channel 1, and for French, it's channel 3. I also welcome everybody who is watching us online. This event is web streamed, and we will try to make it as interactive as possible. Also, everybody in this room, feel free to ask questions later on once we reach the substance of the discussion. I introduce to you my colleague Marietje Schaake from D66, the Dutch liberals. I hope I pronounced that remotely correctly. Yeah. Whose brainchild this seminar is, and I will give the floor to her right away to introduce our panelists and the subject of today's debate. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting debate with all of you.
Thank you, Alexander, and I would also like to welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We really look forward to a lively discussion because freedom of expression is under threat in Europe, and this is not something to be taken lightly. Journalists, cartoonists, but also scientists and people who speak out can be and are under increasing scrutiny. There's censorship, but there's also people who apply self-censorship, and in the worst cases, individuals cannot live freely anymore, and this is unacceptable in Europe. We're hosting this seminar because we want to have an interactive discussion with you. As Alexander mentioned, the meeting is live streamed, and we'll also take some questions through Twitter. We've heard a lot of people who couldn't be here today but who are happy to participate, and we will include their questions in the discussion. We would like to learn from the examples given by our distinguished panel. We have the first panel with two guests that are present here. The first one is Naema Tahir on the right side. She's an author of British Dutch origin, but also a human rights lawyer. She was born in Pakistan, and she's worked as a lawyer advising and working with several organizations, ministries in the Netherlands, but also the UNHCR, and she worked as a lawyer at the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. She then started writing books and has authored several ones focusing on the empowerment of Muslim women, their human rights and reproductive rights, issues of identity, migration and integration, which have been published in the Netherlands. And her latest book is due to come out later this year, which is a novel about forced marriages. So we look forward to hearing from her. Then we'll hear first we'll hear from Lars Vilks, who's on my left-hand side, who is an artist. He has a PhD in the history of art and teaches art theory at Bergen Art Academy in Norway. He was involved in a controversy when he portrayed the Prophet Muhammad as a roundabout dog, but he is an artist without a political agenda, and that's the focus of his work. So his personal experiences will be of great interest to us as well. Then we will have a video presentation that Flemming Rose taped for us. Flemming Rose is the opinion and culture editor of Jyllands-Posten, which is Denmark's largest newspaper. He's been with the paper since 2004, and he commissioned the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad that sparked the riots across the Muslim world in 2005. So he will share his personal experiences with freedom of expression. After the short presentations of our speakers, there will be a discussion, and then we will take a short break to switch to the second panel, which will focus on legal and political implications of freedom of expression in Europe. And I will announce the speakers more extensively when we reach that point, but our second panel will have Julian Assange of WikiLeaks and Birgitta Jonsdottir of the Icelandic Parliament, and Professor Alistair Mullis from the United Kingdom. So we'll get back to those, and without further ado, let us begin, and I would like to give the floor to Lars Vilks. Thank you.
Thank you. It was back in 2007 when I was to participate in an exhibition called Dog in Art, and at that point I was very interested in how the openness in the art world functioned. And it was said that everything had been done, there's no borders, there's nothing more, everything is possible in art, and I didn't believe that at all. And I knew, for example, that there was one example of a taboo you never touch, and that is to go into something concerning Islam. And for that sake, I made the prophet as a traffic roundabout dog, which is a Swedish phenomenon. I have no time to explain it here, but it's quite a positive thing. So it was kind of jokey thing I made about this. And I was invited to this exhibition, and everyone was happy with it until the very last moment. The exhibition was hanged, and suddenly, in the last moment, they took it down. I wasn't there, but there was by random, there was a journalist in the room, and he saw that they took it down. And suddenly, they feared that this could be dangerous to have a drawing of that kind hanging in the gallery. Even this was a small gallery far away in the Swedish forests. And so the thing moved on, and after a while, a Swedish newspaper actually wrote an editorial article about the principles on defaming a religion. It was a very concise and interesting article, but it actually led to a form of disaster, because there were a Muslim community in this place where it was published, and they started protesting. They were not interested in the text, but only saw the picture. And that is one of the things that I am most concerned with. That is out of context things. Things are taken out of context. Where you just see one thing, you believe that you can just look at one thing, and then you have the understanding. So this spread. A few weeks later, the president of Iran made a statement, because they have been informing Iran about this, and they burnt the Swedish flag in Pakistan, and it ended up with I got a fatwa from Al-Qaeda, so things stirred up at that moment. So I got into the experience of receiving daily death threats and things like that. Now I've been dealing with this for many years, so I'm taking it rather easy these days, because I can see differences. This year things turned back again, because the drawing is actually here. I will make a very short showing of it, because so no one be offended. But I think this is the one. Yeah. So we have done the freedom of expression short version, and this year suddenly it came that there was a murder complot was found in Ireland, of all places, connected to the United States, and they were planning to murder me. I found this being like a soap opera, but actually it probably was some sort of serious case. And it stirred up a lot of attention to this. And I also had the interest in the idea of freedom of expression. I was invited to a Swedish university to have a lecture on freedom of expression, and suddenly one day before the lecture it was cancelled, because there were foreign students that had protested against this lecture. So actually one censored a lecture on freedom of expression. Luckily enough, I had another occasion, and that was in the Swedish very well-known University of Uppsala, where I was going to deliver a lecture about freedom of expression, and especially then in the art world. And I was also going to present my own project and what all this was about. This was a very good occasion for me to actually explain what I was dealing with. because, as I said, my point of view is a principle matters, and I have the idea about what do the art do in the field of freedom of expression. So I started this lecture. I just came 6-7 minutes into this lecture. I've been showing different examples of well-known artists dealing with certain issues in, for example, religious matters. I was showing clashes with Christianity. And then I was showing just one example. It was an Iranian artist who had made a video about Islam and homosexuality. And when I was just showing this, there was an outburst in the room because there was a Muslim mob among the spectators there. And they stormed the lecture room. And I was actually saved by the bodyguards who had a battle. There was a battle going on for half an hour in the room after that. So I mean, you came to the conclusion that there's some problems. I mean, if you come to a university and you give a decent lecture, I mean, I'm an art historian and all that, and the lecture can be stopped. And this was then followed up with a more serious case. A couple of weeks later, two Muslim guys, they tried to burn down my house. They crashed the windows and set fire at the inside. And luckily enough for me, they poured, by some reason they got gas on themselves, so they burned. One of them was burned, and he burned, so they panicked and didn't fulfill their thing. So there is a few things here which I think is important. That when you do something, let's say working on a higher level, because when we work with art, you certainly have a context. And as I have no political agenda, which is very important because I belong to no political party, and I have not been very concerned about the Islam question, it's something I've been dragged into during these years. But at least, I mean, if you go into that question, you find that the conditions are very difficult. And what I would say is the worst thing is that the debaters, there were several debaters who said that after the Uppsala incident, actually when the mob stormed the room, they said that I had to be aware that that was my own fault. Because when you show matters of this kind, you have to understand that these people, they are a weak group and they want to protest in their way, and we have to understand that we have different cultural attitudes. So far, you could go in defending such a situation, and I think that this leads up to some sort of discussion about. What borders and limits we should have for expressing this, which I think is a quite ordinary thing. Defaming a religion should be possible doing with all religions. We have no problems with any other religion than just this one. So, so that is let's say that is my personal experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was very powerful story, and thank you for sharing it with us. We're now going to ask Naema Tahir to share her view and experience with freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marietje, and I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak on the topic of freedom of expression. I've been a writer for 5 years now, and I started writing about the human rights of Muslim women. And I found myself speaking a lot on the freedom of expression. But 2 years ago, I had a very difficult experience with this very idea of the freedom of expression. I'd like to pose to you the question I posed myself and the dilemma I had through this question. I wanted to write a book of fairy tales, and I wanted to use the fairy tales the European countries already have, the fairy tales of Grimm and the fairy tales of Van Andersen, and rewrite them and pose the question, let's say you have Little Red Riding Hood. I wanted to make her a Muslim, and I wanted to see how the fairy tale would then end. Who would be the big bad wolf? Would her would her red scarf she wears be a green headscarf, an Islamic headscarf? I wanted to explore the question of morality through Muslim fairy tales. But I wanted to use the name Muhammad for all my characters. So the big bad wolf was named Muhammad. In Sleeping Beauty, the prince who had to kiss the princess was named Muhammad, and so on and so forth. This question I'd like to pose to you. Can you use the name Muhammad for a character in a novel? And can you do it repetitively? Let me see. People asked me why particularly did I want to choose the name Muhammad. I think in these days when I started writing about Muslims, it's quite a catchy name. It already introduces you to, if someone opens a book and there's a name Muhammad, you already are introduced to an Islamic setting without naming Islam itself. So I thought it was a quite friendly way of introducing the reader to a more, to a fiction and a fictionized character and a fictionized setting, to introduce the reader to then see how Muslims deal with the question of morality. And I think I like the name Muhammad. It's a very romantic name. I think these days it's become a very difficult name to hear. When the name Muhammad falls in a room, I experience that people become very uneasy, and that is a shame. So I wanted to romanticize this name and kind of put it in my own context and make it more friendly. Now, my stories about these fairy tales made Muhammad a very busy person. In this book, he lies, he cheats, he has many girlfriends, he has many wives, but he's also honest, he's a very honorable man, he's actually a human being. Now, what happened when I completed the book? I kind of started struggling. The book was really complete. There had been thousands and thousands of copies printed out by my editor, but there wasn't a cover on it yet. So I had a few weeks to kind of revise the text, but in principle the book had been finished. And then I suddenly started struggling. I live in the Netherlands. I've been involved and engaged in the debate on Muslims since 9/11. It sounds like a cliche, but that was the time I started engaging myself in the debate, and it's a heated debate. There is a lot of speech, but it's a quite heated debate, and a lot of attention is given to provocation. A lot of attention is given to hate speech. I struggled with the question, can I use the name Muhammad, which of course refers to the Prophet of Islam. It also refers to millions of boys' first name, but it primarily refers to the Prophet. People think about the Prophet primarily if the name Muhammad falls. I asked my friends and my advisors, what shall I do? And funnily enough, there were two sets of opinions. The first group said, please go ahead and use the name Muhammad. Muslims need to get used to free speech. They need to become more comfortable with even the ridiculizing of their holy prophet, even the Holy Quran, God, etc., as it is the case for other religions. And another group of friends said, no, don't use it, because it might be dangerous. Look at all the examples, and of course the Rushdie affair is one of the primary examples people use, and they said, well, if you use it, there is this danger. So I struggled again, because there was not a unanimous opinion with my friends and advisors. I struggled again. I'd like you to struggle with me, and just imagine you're writing this book, and would you put in that name, or would you take out the name? Now, I took it out. I called my publisher and I said, look, is it possible to just destroy these thousands and thousands of copies of my book? And well, we talked about finance, of course, and we discussed about the whose bank balance this would disrupt more. But that was just a side, and that was a secondary issue. I cut it out. I cut all the names Muhammad out of the novel. There were about 15. I cut all the names Aisha, because the girls were all called Aisha. I wanted to keep it simple. I cut their names out. I took out the word Quran and used the Holy Scripture as a text, as a word, and I took out the name Allah, which is the God of Muslims, and used God, which is a more neutral term. Now, ladies and gentlemen, is this neo-censorship? And is this neo-censorship, or whatever it is it something which had to do with fear? It's not easy, that question. Again, I will answer that question in twofold. Part of me did, of course, take out the name Muhammad because of fear. We do, unfortunately, live in a society where one cannot express what one wants to. For me, even just writing about the human rights of Muslim women is it's a dangerous profession. I have to be careful. So there was this type of fear that I didn't want to become a threatened Muslim writer. I didn't want to go into hiding. So there was this fear. But I think there was something equally important, and that is, that weighed a bit heavier. I applied the censorship because of something I would call civilization. I took out the name Muhammad because I knew that if I left it in, the probability would have been very high that my book would have been considered a provocation. And for that reason, for the wrong reason, it would have gotten a certain media attention. It would have insulted Muslims for certain reasons. And I didn't want that. I'm not a politician. I'm not an agent provocateur. I'm a novelist. And I want to be judged on my novels, on the literary content, on the literary quality. By taking out the name Muhammad, I hoped that the press would focus on what the book was about, the question of morality. How do Muslims deal with questions of good and bad, good and evil, within their families, within their small communities? I think that's a good thing. I think when someone applies censorship to lift the quality of one's work, it's a good thing. I think it's civilized to show some restraint. I think it's civilized to sometimes be prudent. But still, I'm not happy about it. I still feel that it is necessary for some people to provoke. So I would still advocate that. But I think the way I chose, and I'm not complimenting myself, but I think the civilized way of speaking about sensitive issues is the better way. And it's the better way because it's going to be more effective to invite Muslims who are a sensitive group to actually read a text without being offended. When I was a young child, I couldn't read, or not, you're not a young child, when I was a bit younger than now, I couldn't read satanic verses. I had to put it at a distance, and sometimes I would just open it up. I couldn't read it because I felt offended as a Muslim. Once I grew older, that type of feeling offended just left me because my mind got opened and then I could read it. I think many Muslims have that. They would easily read a book if they know this will not offend us. And I think we have to look for means where we do speak of sensitive issues. I think it's going to be quite controversial, so I'll be very interested in your reaction to this quote, but also to the rest of the issues I've raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful, very thought-provoking. We will end with a short video clip before we start the discussion. So have your questions ready. We have Flemming Rose virtually present here today. So I don't know who I should ask to start, but I think yes.
In a democracy, you have many rights. You have the right to vote, you have the right to freedom of expression, you have the right to freedom of religion, the right to freedom of assembly, and the right to freedom of movement, and even more rights. But I believe that the only right you do not have is the right not to be offended. You don't have a special right not to be offended, and I think this is crucial when we talk about freedom of expression and the limits of freedom of expression in a world that is turning more and more globalized. Basically, this debate about freedom of expression and its limits is about how we live together in a world that is getting more complex, in terms of culture, in terms of religion, and in terms of ethnicity. It is due to two facts. One is migration. People are moving across borders at an extent and in numbers that we have never experienced before in the history of mankind. And it will not stop. It's going to continue. And the second factor has to do with communications technology, that what is being published in the Netherlands and in Denmark is immediately being published everywhere if it exists on the internet. And it means that context disappears. The context for a specific expression can be moved to another culture and being read and interpreted in a very different way. So then the question is, what do we do in this new world when it comes to freedom of expression and its limits? And I think basically that there are two ways to go. One is to say, if you respect my taboo, I respect yours. If it's a criminal offense to publish cartoons of the Prophet, it may also be a criminal offense to deny the Holocaust. And this is one of the reasons why I'm in favor of getting rid of Holocaust denial laws in Europe. Not because I think there is any similarity between offending a religious figure and offending the memory of 6 million people who were killed in Europe, but because people do have different thresholds of offense, and if we respect or accept the notion, if you respect my taboo, I respect yours, then everybody will have the chance of playing their taboo card and ask people to shut up if they say something that they don't like. The other way to go is to say, okay, we need as few limitations on speech as possible. And I think the only defendable limitation of speech should be incitement to violence. You have a few others, maybe libel, the right to privacy and so on, but very important is incitement to violence. And I think there is a growing trend in Europe where you raise the barrier for what is not allowed to being said. And it has to do with the fact that there is an increasing separation between liberty and freedom on the one side and the right not to be discriminated against and equality on the other. What people say that is offensive is increasingly being interpreted as non-discrimination. And I think we have to accept that there is a difference between words saying something that might be perceived as indiscrimination and deeds doing something that is discrimination. And we have to fight the latter and defend the right to say the former. Thank you.
Okay, well, those were three very thought-provoking introductions. And I've seen some of our fellow members of the European Parliament colleagues coming in, so I'd like to welcome them, Mr. Enciu, Ms. Wallace, and maybe I'm missing out on some, but please make yourselves known. Mr. Enciu, did you also want to say something first, or?
I don't know. In the moment that it will start the debate.
Start the debate now with the first panel. So.
Okay. I would like to refer myself to the issue of self-censorship, and I would like to give you a few examples of the cases and to ask a question to our invitee about how they are thinking that we can act in the future, do not use anymore this self-censorship. And self-censorship can occur at the level of expression when it comes to relation between EU member state, even if the honor of interest of one of them is harmed by the actions of another state. For example, I give you some example real. When the French invaded so-called Romanian greetings, I don't know if you know about it, where when Romanians from centers communities like Spain and Italy have been called gypsies, thieves, Romanian, and I'm referring here to the authorities, politicians, and even journalists, have adopted a self-censorship policy and had a little or limited reaction to xenophobic manifestations. Common sense must be applied in cases when the state authorities are not involved or when they haven't reacted accordingly. Yet, this is not enough, and there are cases when the right attitude must be taken and when the proper signals must be sent. Another example worth considering is us, members of European Parliament, representing Romania. When we apply the self-censor and prefer to stand by in situations that could harm the national group interests or even personal interests, so that we won't put out political family or our colleagues in a difficult position. I could provide you with various examples on this, but I won't, for the same reason as the one I just mentioned. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule when certain colleagues have been broken the good rule in the European Parliament, addressing offenses to persons, political groups, or even nations. These are the cases when we should remind our colleagues about common sense and self-censorship. Censorship and self-censorship in the Romania press, I will refer this because I am involved in this issue, and as you know, I'm a member of media group, and also 5 of us has tabled a written declaration to help the journalists. Then in the Romanian press, considering the various economic problems, because everything starts from this, in working, as the media trust became vulnerable to the influence of authorities, and so they apply censorship so that they won't offend the parties in power, the president or certain members of the government. Example, a broadcasting TV, Realitatea TV, a Romanian news channel, is subject to an governmental institution control, which leads to opening of a dossier for Realitatea's TV patron, a fact that makes the liability and the objectiveness of the news questionable. There is also the self-censorship.
Mr. Enschu, could you please ask a question of the panel?
Yes. I would like to know, what is the best approach in your view for censorship and self-censorship? Freedom of expression must not be constrained by any political, religious, or economical matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take 2 more questions and then go back to the panel. And I would encourage speakers to be a bit to the point. Thank you. No one has a question otherwise? Then, oh, yes, sir.
The art, basically, and literature to Ms. Tahir. That is why when we write something, we have objective to write. And in my opinion, that our writing should contribute to humanity, to develop it, or to improve human conditions. But how much, like minority, because I come also from minorities, I like to ask that how much has been written in last 10 years in Europe when we do content analysis of European press on the name of the freedom of speech, that my issues, which have been really bigger magnitude, have not been addressed. 80% of press, writing, literature, really devoted to to really stigmatize these communities. And number two is that why we are choosing, but if we see in case of Netherlands translation, almost 80% about, let's say, Pakistan, have been most of the time targeting these controversial issues. But the best poetry, literature, which that country produced, we hardly see single translation of this literature. We choose the writers from those countries also which are very controversial, and the name of, these are historical academic debates we should do and nobody should be prevented. But are we doing services by writing like this? Thank you.
Yes, my name is Hajo Friedrich. I'm a freelance journalist from Germany. I must say I'm a little bit astonished, or not to say shocked, from a party who strongly advocates civil rights to hear a plaidoyer not to use these civil rights. Because, Mrs. Tahir, what you said, that sensitive issues should be dealt without provocation. Everything is sensitive from a certain point of view. This is a worst case thinking. This is a dequalification and self-dequalification of basic Western rights. And I'm really astonished that the European Parliament and the Liberals are the party to advocate such positions. So let's really discuss about it in a way, and not delegate the free speech to artists or to comedians. This is the end of a free press.
Shall we take these 3 questions and then take a new round of questions?
Let me answer the last point first. I believe, and I'm not going to speak for Ms. Tahir because she can speak for herself, but let me be very clear. As liberals, we clearly defend the right to offend. But we also defend the right to choose not to offend. So, in my view, freedom of expression means you can be offensive, you can be aggressive, you can be provocative, you can say things that you know will cause trouble. But if you are consistent and you're thinking about freedom and liberties, you must respect the choice, in my view at least, the choice of, say, a novelist, a journalist, not to do this. Now, I think what we have heard here, and we will hear a little bit more about this in a minute, is this very delicate process. How do you make that choice? How is that choice made? At what time? In what context? In what literary or artistic or journalistic form do you choose to either offend or, consciously not to offend? I think freedom is about more than just to offend. Freedom is about having the opportunity to do so, but it's also about the opportunity to choose not to do so. And therefore, when you say the European Parliament, and specifically the liberals, are advocating, a timid approach to freedom of expression, I have to disagree with you, which is also an expression of our freedom to disagree in the same room. But I do so emphatically. I emphatically disagree. We do not advocate timidity. We advocate freedom both to offend and to choose not to offend.
There is this point of view that when I did my offense, that offense was directed towards the art world, because there was actually no other audience that was actually interested in this event. And so that was a natural thing to do, as you do challenge and transgress in the art world. The thing is that when a certain context fact-based work then leaks out into the world, and things are very different there, because there will be no refinement, there will be no discussion on that level where it was thought. So the question is then, is this good or bad? You can see that the risk that came out with the threats has caused something which I have studied thoroughly, and that is that in the art world they have made several exhibitions with many artists concerning religion, called Gods and Oh My God, or now lately they made a blasphemy exhibition in Ireland that was going to kind of protest towards the law against blasphemy in Ireland. All this exhibition has then insult on the religions, but there is one exception in all exhibitions. They don't touch Islam. They have the self-censorship, because if they do, they might get threat to the museum, and people working there will be put in a position better not to deal with these matters. And you will also have the risk of being accused of racism. So therefore, it's better you push this aside. So that's a kind of censorship you can observe in the art world.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take the last question first. I'm actually glad you were shocked to hear that I censored my own work, and also shocked because I probably said that I think sensitive issues need to be dealt better, not through provocation, but through a civilized manner of speech. Now, let me just come back to when I took out the name Mohammed in my book. I also felt this same anger and this shock. I'm living in the Netherlands. I'm a human rights lawyer myself. I utilize the freedom of expression every day through using my pen, and then I pose to myself this self-censorship. But after a while, I felt that it's not just self-censorship. Of course, there was this fear, but there was something broader than the fear, and that was the desire to express myself in a more restrained and in a more sensitive way. Now, I would defend any person who provokes and who ridiculizes, who criticizes Islam or Muhammad or the Holy Book or what have you, or any religion. I would defend that person because I believe in freedom of speech. I just think that if we want communities to be more open, communities which are sensitive, communities which are generally closed, such as some of the immigrant Muslim communities in Europe, then it's better not just to provoke as a means to open up minds. I think it's also better to use a more civilized, a more advanced, a more high-quality speech. So I would always advocate for two things: more speech and better speech. And there is this tendency to reward provocative speech. Now, my book didn't sell that much because I took out the name Muhammad. Probably if I left it in, I would have, become a millionaire or something. So more speech and better speech, I would really defend that. I'd like to maybe refer to the gentleman over there who said that literature the objective to write should be to contribute to humanity, to good things. I think my objective as a writer is to seek the truth, and sometimes the truth can be very ugly. I've encountered many Muslim women who do not get their human rights respected, and I think we should write about that. My problem with a lot of closed communities is that mostly they are controversial and criticasters who come out of the community and write. Those are the most courageous. Those have a critical distance towards the community to be able to feel free to write. I think if the community would be more open, there would be more speech from coming out of that community. And of course, we should focus also on the beautiful things of Muslims, poetry, the huge amounts of nice songs, etc. There's a lot of culture out there, but I think we won't ever win that battle. I mean, no news is good news, or good news is no news. but we should still advocate for more speech and better speech. Thank you.
Let me just come back in briefly or to reply to what you brought up, Mr. Enschu. The idea about the seminar, or the underlying premise is that yes, we do have freedom of expression in Europe, but that it is under threat. And I believe it is under threat by a number of factors, not all of which we can address here this afternoon. But some of the factors that you just mentioned are not limited to Romania. Not at all. For example, the political influence on state media. I can give you a very current example from Germany, where the editor-in-chief of one of our national broadcasters was made to leave upon political pressure, not for anything in particular or any program, but it was a political pressure for him to leave. We have the issue of media concentration. So much power in so few hands that you actually, as an editor, you can pick your journalists and you will have one journalistic line presented to the public. On the national level, we observe something like this in Italy. But again, my own country, in Germany, on a local level. Local newspapers usually are monopolies in their respective region, a phenomenon we also know from the United States. There are some problems here in this field because you have only one voice in print. Now, on the local level, you can compensate it, I believe, by access to the internet. But for local news, regional news, it's more difficult than that. Then, of course, there's the issue of straightforward censorship, something we don't have in the European Union, I hope. But in Belarus, we have it. Just east of Poland, we clearly have straightforward censorship. And we have pure violence in Russia. If you are an investigative journalist writing about corruption of local elites in Russia, you are very likely to come under physical threat, something that I think is completely unacceptable as well. And just to remind you, the room in which we just held a press conference, in which we regularly hold press conferences in this parliament, is named after Anna Politkovskaya, the Russian journalist who was murdered for her investigative work. So your premise that freedom of expression is under threat, we fully agree with that, and I believe it is something that we need to address, we need to discuss, we need to improve, because I believe it's not something that should stand.
Okay, I wanted to say something briefly to the gentleman in the blue shirt, because you implied a connection between the speakers and the Liberal group and what we stand for. What we stand for is to have an invitation for debate about this very important, very complex, very thought-provoking topic. But we, of course, speak on our own behalf, and so do the speakers. And I think this is really important also in terms of this debate, really, because what too often happens is that the words or the expressions of one individual are connected or implied to be applicable for the entire group, or an alleged group of people, rather. And so I would just like to share my thoughts, and I think a thought that fits very well with liberal thinking is that individuals should be held accountable for their own expressions, and we should be very, very careful with group thinking in the context of this freedom of expression debate. So if the panel doesn't have any further additions, I would like to ask if there are other questions, because we couldn't bring in all questions in the first round. Yes.
I'm Joe McNamee from European Digital Rights. I'd just like to mention a few things that the EU and Council of Europe are doing to support self-censorship. We have an ongoing process for a recommendation of the Council of Europe on profiling, the current text of which, in my view, legitimizes state-sponsored profiling of individuals. We have, for the last number of years in most European countries, the directive on retention of communications data. In a breathtaking moment of cynicism, the European Parliament managed to adopt a written declaration to protect children, to have data retention extended to search engines last week. We have a proposal for internet blocking on an EU level, and we already have internet blocking for gambling and intellectual property in many European states. The DG Justice of the European Commission is currently working with industry to produce an agreement on takedown of unproven illegal material. And I'll just read the current text to you in order to avoid misrepresenting it. It suggests that in cases of notification by law enforcement authorities, a complaint hotline or other body duly authorized or tasked under national law to monitor internet content, internet service providers should take the content down unless they consider the notified content is legal. So that means whenever you're putting anything online, it's not a question of whether it's legal or not, it's whether or not an authority tasked to monitor internet content may at some moment in the future consider that it might be illegal. So the threats are coming from very close to home. Thank you.
Let's see if there are some other questions. I'm not sure if you want a specific answer or if you just want to address this issue, but we'll come back to that. So are there any other questions directed at the panel at this point?
Can I just
Yes.
to the last gentleman? If you think it's legal, you can leave the stuff up, apparently.
If your internet service provider is certain that it's legal, then the internet service provider may take the legal risk of ignoring the advice that he was given and leave it online. The internet service provider isn't the publisher. No.
Okay, I'm already looking forward to the next panel, because in the next panel we're going to have specifically more attention to the legal and political aspects of freedom of expression, also freedom of access to information, etc. So perhaps some of those issues will be addressed, but it might be good to repeat here that the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe is in fact very active. There's, of course, a diversity of voices, but overall, as a political group, we've been very active to protect privacy, civil liberties, and with a specific focus on the online sphere. So we share many of the concerns that you've raised, and we're fighting for that in this House. Unfortunately, not everybody agrees. And I also believe that there's a lack of information sometimes, because it's, no one will argue against the need to fight child pornography, for example, but the ways in which to do so are not always as clearly understandable or transparent. So I think yourself and other people who work with us in the context of European policy making are very valuable, not only to inform us as lawmakers, but to also inform the general public about what the details are of this very complex set of technical, legal, political elements that sometimes implicitly or indirectly can limit freedom of expression or access to information. So I think this is a very valuable contribution, but I do believe, moreover, our political group is aware.
I'd just like to, can I just make a closing remark? I think I can. I'd just like to invite the European Parliament, but also the people who are interested here in this topic. We are always interested in people who apply neo-censorship as a means to restrain themselves out of fear or anything. But I think we should maybe also put some attention to people who maybe show restraint or prudence just to make their work qualitatively better. And maybe we should look at that type of work. Books on, let's say, homosexuals or on Muslim women who struggle in family life, books which are not provocative but which do contribute to opening up minds. And there's a lot of emphasis, again, on neo-censorship, on the shame, on the fear, on the feeling of sorriness we have. But we should also celebrate and put in the limelight the people who use this right in a prudent fashion. And we don't read enough books, and we don't invite enough people who haven't applied self-censorship but just restrain themselves, just make beautiful prose and poetry, etc. So I would just like to invite the European Parliament to conduct such a debate, inviting the other side, people who are not scared, but people who are happy to write and who have been able to express themselves on sensitive issues without any fear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. on this remark, I think this is a very good idea to continue this debate. Let me just say on your remark, sir, especially considering this written declaration, number 29, I suppose it was. For those of you who were in Strasbourg last week, it was impossible. It was absolutely impossible to overlook the campaign that was there for, the signature of written declaration 29. I've never seen a PR campaign for any kind of written declaration in this House beforehand. But again, the intention of those who signed was to fight against child pornography, a goal on which everybody agrees, at least everybody who's decent. The issue, however, was that the text contained references to the data retention directive, it is, and nobody knew what was exactly behind it. So while doing one meritorious thing, you did something that was, by signing this, that was clearly not very wise from a privacy, from a freedom of expression point of view, which is, by the way, why our group also advised against signing the written declaration. Thank you very much to all of you for the first panel. Lars, you want to come? Mr. Vilks, come.
Yeah, we're coming to some last thoughts on the first panel, and then we'll move on to the second one. So, Mr. Vilks.
Two things here. When talking about pedophilia, I was just liking to give some attention at an art project made on the subject. That was in 2009 when Ulla Kartunen, which is a Finnish artist, made a project about pedophilia. And this was also about how easy you could find pictures on the net. And so she brought down to her exhibition pictures she has found on the net and presented them to an audience. And this was, of course, a very critical project against pedophilia. But what happened was that the police came, and she was taken to court and sentenced. And she tried to appeal all the way up, but actually this was illegal to do. So therefore, you can easily kind of take things out of context, even if you have a kind of urgent matter, and there is a strong reason for doing this. And I think this is a very important case, that how things can be misunderstood. Another thing which I think is important when you are offending or not offending, and that is the thing about equality. Because when you use freedom of speech, the interesting freedom of speech has a certain quality. When it has no quality, I mean, you have many bad things and bad opinions that are expressed, and these we could be without, but when you have the right to say so. So I mean, the real question you have is to have a discussion when you have a case, is this worth anything? Is it worth, so that we can say it has a quality, not only being the principle of things. The other side of this, which I've been thinking a lot about, it is that when you are avoiding the offense, saying we should maybe be more delicate in this matter, be more careful before we do something here, because we maybe do not get it right. I mean, this is a matter of tactics. And what you are saying in that moment, that when we are addressing these people, they are not ready for the level of offense. I mean, we European, we are standing up to offense. We know what that is about. But we have those others who do not have that standard. So let's be pedagogical, let's be tactical. And so we present it in another way, in another package. That is, of course, one thing, but I think you should be very honest about this, that we are trying not to give the full thing, but say these people can't take it. Let's cool down and take it a little easy. Let's be pedagogical. Let's be tactical. But if you also go for this thing, which I've been thinking very much about, and it's been a very big part of my project when I was making this profit, there was, of course, all this about racism and everything. And one thing that came out there was that my project actually had made a difference in Swedish politics. So the right-wing racist side would increase in this matter, and it would kidnap this project. But actually, what has happened is that if you look at opinions about this, there has been no growth on that side. I mean, it has actually not been making any other difference then, and I think that's important, attention to debate. And there's one thing I think I've learned, and I'm willing to say that it's better to have an open debate than trying to deny this debate because you want to avoid the question. The debate is never wrong. Thank you.
So I think this is very interesting and important topic, and I thank you for your contributions and for not shying away from thought-provoking and even bordering taboos in the eyes of some people to bring up those topics. And we're going to switch panels here, so please stay for the next panel, which will deal with the legal and political implications of freedom of expression and access to information. So it will be 1 minute, and we will pick it right up again with the new panel. Thank you. Okay, after everybody has had a chance to stretch their legs, we're going to go right on, because there's a lot to be said still. After the personal experiences, or some elements on a personal basis with freedom of expression, we're now moving to the second panel, which will deal with legal and political elements, aspects around freedom of expression in Europe. We have three exceptionally interesting guests. I will begin on the left side with Birgitta Jonsdottir. She's a member of parliament in Iceland, but she's also a poet, a journalist, an internet pioneer, an activist, and a publisher. So pretty much everything, every hat to put on to engage in this discussion. She's been in the Icelandic parliament since April 2009, and she has been the leading initiator of the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative, which was voted on in the Icelandic parliament last week and was unanimously adopted, for which we congratulate you. And we're very happy to hear from you about your experiences with this initiative, because it might well be one of the most pragmatic and concrete examples of how we can guarantee stronger protection of freedom of expression, information, and the press all over Europe. On the right-hand side, we welcome Julian Assange, who's the founder and director of WikiLeaks, which is a multi-jurisdictional public service designated to protect whistleblowers, journalists, and activists who have sensitive materials to communicate to the public. And last but not least, on my left-hand side, Professor Alistair Mullis, who holds a chair in law. He's actually the dean at the Norwich Law School, the University of East Anglia, and he's also a visiting research professor at the Faculté des Sciences Juridiques at Tunis, and holds visiting chairs at the universities of Münster in Germany and Thammasat in Thailand. So has been around the world to teach research and talk about his fields of interest, which are the areas of law of defamation, international commercial law, and torts. And he's published widely in these areas and is also the general editor of the new edition of the Carter Book on Libel and Privacy. So a very appropriate and diverse panel to talk about legal and political aspects of freedom of expression. Let's begin with Birgitta, if that's okay, and then we will go in the order of presentation.
Yes. Well, when we started to work on the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative, just around the time when we first filed it into the parliament, there was an incredible skepticism, both in the Icelandic media and the international media, that we would actually get this through, because it is quite revolutionary to do it the way we're doing it. Not only is it this proposal and this idea different, at least when it comes to the Icelandic parliament, is that it was basically written by people from all over the world that really are concerned about the issues of freedom of expression and information in our world. And as the media is moving increasingly into the field of the internet, and information is basically doesn't have any borders anymore. Happened to be one person that worked with us, I have never met him, happens to be here, worked with us on an Etherpad where we were writing up the proposal. He is sitting right there. So it's you who are turning your, this person helped us write the proposal, and it was unique. I'd never met him before. We brought together people from all over, like all continents we could possibly find, to have an experience with the erosion of freedom of information in our world. And what struck me was that usually you think about China, you usually think about Russia and so forth when you think about these rights being taken away, journalists in particular. But what I found when I started to research is that the situation here in Europe is much worse than I thought it was, in particular because of the Anti-Terrorism Act. But the idea behind the IMI proposal was basically based on doing a reverse on tax havens. What tax havens do is that they pull together all the best possible legislation from the world in order to create secrecy. What we decided to do is to pull together all the best possible legislation from around the world to create transparency and to ensure freedom of information, expression, and speech. And what I have managed to task the Icelandic government to do is to change 13 laws in 4 different ministries in order to strengthen legislation when it comes to whistleblowers, when it comes to sources, when it comes to prevent gagging on news before they're told, when it comes to IP hosts. And the list is quite extensive, and I encourage you to look at this proposal on the internet at immi.is. We also want to create the first international award in Iceland, the Icelandic Prize for Freedom of Expression. And we want protection from liable tourism and other extrajudicial abuses. And we want to have legislation around virtual limited liability companies and so forth. But what struck me the most was, this is like a proposal made in Iceland, and I never expected this profound interest in the international media in this proposal, which shows me that there is a need in our world to be aware of how these basics of rights, these foundations of our democracies, are being eroded every day, just like this gentleman over there from the Digital Freedom. Pardon me, what was the organization you represent?
European Digital Rights.
Was pointing out that these laws that limit our rights of information are being passed every day almost. So I so appreciate this forum for this discussion, and I really hope that there will be many more, and that this is just the beginning of us awaken to a reality that we have to do something. We have to do something now, both on the European level and on a worldwide level. So I won't keep you longer here. Just feel free to ask later.
Thank you very much for the brief but powerful introduction. Julian?
Hello. I have to do this sitting down. This is very low. I'm pretty tall. What are we going to do?
You can there's a button there. And it's going to make you smaller.
Okay. So my name's Julian Assange. I spent over 33 hours getting here on an aeroplane, so I'm a bit tired. I should just mention, for those who don't know, I was also involved with advising the IMI, the IMI, and a particular case in Iceland that involved the injunction of RÚV, the national broadcaster, last year in July, when we published material revealing 6 billion euros worth of loans from the Købthing Bank. A few months ago, the then CEO of Købthing was arrested. So in coming here, I walked past the Sakharov Prize, named after Andrei Sakharov, who was a nuclear physicist in Russia and a famous dissident. And we are now as we were before, sitting in the Anna Politskaya room, another modern-day victim of, I will say, totalitarianism in Russia. But it's not just Russia, and we should understand where Andrei Sakharov came from in an ideological sense and why he is there. Of course, the man is a genuine hero. However, during the Cold War, there was an uneasy alliance between liberals and war hawks. Between liberals trying to keep the best values of the European Enlightenment, and between the press, who wanted liberation for their own domestic affairs, and between those people who wanted a moral stick to beat the Soviet Union. That produced, in an ideological and political sense, the poster of Andrei Sakharov in this very building. That uneasy alliance is gone now. The alliance between liberals and conservatives to push freedom of expression is gone. And that's why all around the world, in different ways, it's been wound back. Because authoritarianism, whether it's institutional or whether it's state-based, is no friend of freedom of expression. It is inherently opposed to it. And it was only during this brief period of the Cold War where we saw it getting into bed with liberals. It is no longer in the same bed. And so now we have a fight on our hands, because that was a large source of power and political influence to hold those values up as a stick, not as something actually held dear. So in 1954, the great encyclopedia of the Soviet Union was amended. Stalin had died, Beria had fallen out of favor. Beria's entry in that great encyclopedia was now out of political favor. And so an amendment was sent out to every registered holder of that encyclopedia, a copy to be pasted in, an expanded version of the section on the Bering Strait, which alphabetically was convenient. Bering Strait is that body of water between Vladivostok and Alaska. But all throughout the libraries of the Soviet Union and other places in the world which had copies of that encyclopedia, it was obvious what was going on. You could see where the paper had been plastered in or where the previous page had been torn out. But that doesn't happen anymore. In fact, now what happens in the West is that central archives of newspapers, like The Guardian, are ripped out every month, invisibly, and there is no tear lines. There are no seams anymore. There is a redaction of history that is occurring quickly and at an ever-progressive rate. So to make that concrete, I was involved in a case along with Martin Bright, a former Guardian correspondent who became the political editor of the New Statesman, is now the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, about exposing abuses by Nahadimi Auchi, who at one stage was the 5th richest man in the UK, very well connected politically. That resulted in fact, Auchi was convicted of corruption in France in 2003 under the magistrate Eva Joly, who is now a member for the Greens. That resulted in Auchi, 5 years after those original articles were produced in The Guardian, getting Carter-Ruck, and we have someone here with a connection to Carter-Ruck. In the industry, we call this body Carter-Fuck, because they send so many letters. We have gotten a lot, and we publish them all. We view it as a bit of a free content service. in forcing The Guardian to remove that material because it was of interest to the US election cycle. Now, Hadimi Auchi had funded a man called Tony Rezko. Tony Rezko was the fundraiser for Barack Obama. So during the crucial period of the US election cycle, that material was removed from The Guardian, even though it had been sitting there for 5 years. And the legislative basis, sorry, the juridical basis under which that sort of action happens is that the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg has found that every time you read something on the internet, it's been republished. So the liabilities for publishing occur every time someone reads something. So Nahadimi Auchi and Kadarak could go after material that we would consider as part of our historical heritage, material that was in the Guardian archives for the past 5 years, reporting on the conviction of a billionaire for corruption in France. They could go after that material and have it removed. And it was removed, and it is still removed. And not just The Guardian, but many other papers. And there are currently, it's hard to know the exact number, but according to UK media lawyers, there are 200 to 300 secret gag orders currently in effect in the United Kingdom. These are not just injunctions to say you can't talk about something. These are injunctions to say that you cannot talk about whatever the subject is, together with the fact that you cannot talk about the fact that you cannot talk about it. So that, to me, seems to be some progressive realization of the ideal Orwellian horror in 1984, where we don't just have a Ministry of Truth that goes through archives slowly pasting over things, but in fact we have centralized archives that are being removed. The stories that were removed from UK papers were also removed from the indexes of those papers. If you go to the URLs concerned for those articles, you will see page not found. You won't see this story has been removed after a legal threat. And the reason being, the argument is that if you see that it has been removed as a result of a legal threat, that will encourage you to go to the library, where you might be able to find the thing still in that antiquated, outdated form of paper. And that would only encourage people to read whatever the libelous or alleged libelous claim was. So there's a serious problem in the way legislation is moving. Now, sea law derives from ships colliding in the night and navies colliding in the day. It derives from the interaction between states. International law is created as a result. Well, there's a new sort of interaction that is occurring between states. It's an interaction of bits mediated by the internet. So there is a great push for harmonization about when you can transmit bits and what sort of bits you can transmit and how long they're able to stay there before being attacked. So we have a question as to which way the law is going to go, because the pressure to harmonization is immense. Are we going to go the way of China? It's actually a disturbing and serious question, because the German government has passed a mandatory state censorship system into law. The Australian government tried to do it, and it's gone through one house. It's gone through the lower house, hasn't gone through the upper house. And there is a pan-European attempt to get a European-wide, instantaneous, real-time, secret censorship system into place on the internet. If there is such a system in place, it will interpose itself between every reader and every newspaper, because all newspapers are going onto the internet. It will interpose itself between every human rights organization and every one of their readers, because all human rights organizations publish on the internet. It will interpose itself between every political party and its audience, because political parties are moving their correspondence to the internet. This is a very serious issue, and once that system is in place, It can be retargeted for any purpose at any time, instantaneously. That's its nature. In a case in Australia where we revealed the secret state censorship blacklist for Australia, a blacklist that is meant to go into that system that the Australian government is proposing, we found, and in fact the government body responsible also agreed, that less than 32% of that list had anything to do at any stage with images of people under the age of 18. The ostensible political framing for a national censorship blacklists, including in Australia, was to prevent the spread of child pornography. But less than 32%, when we actually got down to the list, had anything to do with images of people under the age of 18. Similarly, we have exposed the state censorship blacklists of China and Thailand and numerous other countries, all of which were viewed initially and framed politically as mechanisms to combat child pornography. But in the case of Thailand, there has been over 1,000 sites blacklisted for criticising the king when we actually get down to the list. All these proposals have secrecy embedded within them. They say that the list of what is kept secret, list of what is banned cannot be revealed. And that means that there is no transparency in justice. And the system corrupts itself instantly, and it's not just Asian countries, it's even countries like Australia, modern democracies that suffer this corruption instantly. How are we going for time? Fine? Excellent. All right. So my perspective is, I am an Australian, but I have worked in Europe for some time. And of course, we are all, to some degrees, fans and victims of American culture. So I can see what is happening in Europe from an interesting perspective, which is neither that from the United States or Asia. It is some little Pacific island down there that has connections to all these countries, but isn't in fact part of any particular power group, maybe vaguely Anglo. And I see, for example, in the work that I do in Africa, that libel laws in the United Kingdom, as part of common law and as part of the Commonwealth of law, are used to imprison journalists for writing about ministers and the corruption that ministers go through. They are used in Malaysia to imprison people. And the political justification for this behaviour is the fact that, oh well, Europe does it. Europe has libel laws, and they're important. And look at the UK for a more direct connection. So what happens in European borders doesn't just affect Europe, it's used as justification for even more extreme forms of abuse around the rest of the world. And the US has been slowly slipping on its championing of Enlightenment ideals for the freedom of speech, for the reason that I first outlined, that the great incentive to do that, the great incentive of beating up the Soviet Union is now gone. And it remains to be seen whether there's enough incentive to do that to China for that to be pushed. So Europe has got to take up the slack. And it's necessary not just for Europe, but it's necessary for other countries in the world to be defended by Europe in those ideals, because no one else is going to do it. And, well, actually, Iceland's not technically in Europe yet, but it is in the EEA. So anyway, of course, I champion this initiative that Iceland has produced. It's actually an interesting question as to whether, if Iceland had been formally in Europe at the time that, in the past year when that proposal has been put together, could it have got it together? It's quite an interesting political question. And we were aware of that. I mean, I remember speaking to Birgitta and other people involved, and our hope for Europe, in part, was that, well, we should get this into Iceland now, before Iceland enters into the EU, and then maybe we can drag this along with Iceland into the EU. Because the other way around might be quite hard. But that's an interesting question. Could Luxembourg, for a country nearly the same size, could it come up with similar legislation and get it through? My feeling is probably not. I mean, I'm not an expert on European political affairs, but that's an interesting question as to why not.
I've been picking up on some responses, so I now give the floor to Professor Mullis to give his views, and then we open up the debate.
Thank you very much. Two very difficult speakers, I think, to follow. Julian Assange will be even more difficult were what he was saying, certainly about English law, be accurate. A considerable amount of what he's actually said about English law is not accurate. A little bit of background first. In the last couple of years, calls for reform of the laws that restrict and or prevent the media and others from publishing articles on matters of public interest have become increasingly insistent. In the UK, a very successful campaign, spearheaded by the Index on Censorship and English Pen, has been demanding reform of the English law of defamation. There have been parliamentary debates and government consultations on the subject, and there is now a defamation bill sponsored by Lord Leicester of Herne Hill, who is a member, of course, of the Liberal Democrats, before Parliament. Even more ambitious initiatives have been pursued elsewhere, and you've already heard about the Modern Media Initiative in Iceland. Now, the vision of campaigners in both these countries is to create a legal environment in which the media and others can publish articles and books on matters of public interest without fear of liability. Now, given that neither the UK nor Iceland have reputations as repressive tyrannies, what has led to the call for reform? In the UK, we've had a number of high-profile libel cases, and as I said, we've had this report by Penn and the Index on Censorship that have focused concern on English libel law. Critics have complained that the law's archaic rules chill free speech generally and academic debate in particular. English law has been characterised as being out of line with the rest of the world in terms of free speech. London has apparently become the libel capital of the world, with droves of libel tourists, or as the Americans would call them, libel terrorists, lining up to sue those who publish books and articles that make an important contribution to public debate. Now, in principle, I strongly welcome the debate that has been stimulated by both the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative and the Penn Index on Censorship report. I am concerned at the potential for misuse of law so as to preclude investigative journalism, to stifle scientific and media and medical debate, to undermine the important work of human rights organisations and other NGOs, or to invite a flood of legal tourists from abroad. To the extent that the law allows powerful individuals or corporate entities to chill important, warranted comment concerning themselves, their activities, their products or their ideas, it is socially dysfunctional and it should be reformed. That said, it's my view that the current commentary on the law, particularly in England, but also elsewhere, has been particularly one-sided and in some respects dangerously oversimplified. A number of cause célèbres have been exploited on occasions with little concern for the underpinning facts in order to secure superficial political impact. While the general call for reform has seemed clamorous, specific proposals are either based on a dearth of evidence or on a partial representation of the existing law. In consequence, I'm nervous that important societal functions performed by the law have been underplayed, and that ill-thought-out reforms may serve to unbalance the public sphere to the detriment of all in the modern democratic state. I am interested in freedom of speech, but not freedom of all speech. The law and other forms of regulation can legitimately, and indeed must be used to prevent the media from causing damage out of all proportion to the good achieved by openness. In the immediate context, the media should not be free to publish false and damaging allegations without any fear of being put to redress. Any attempt to garner the public benefit that might be achieved by releasing investigative journalists from the strictures of libel law risks absolving less reputable scribes of liability for naked intrusions and falsehoods. If the law can draw or redirect the scorpion's sting, then perhaps we'll all make it across the river. Now, turning to more specific proposals, I'll say something about the proposals in the two countries. A couple of general observations first. First of all, certainly in terms of the IMI proposals, I don't underestimate the potential of these proposals to change thinking and provide models for other jurisdictions wanting to make their laws more freedom of expression friendly. But the practical impact, at least in the short to medium term, is unlikely to be very great. I suppose it's possible, as a consequence of the proposed change in laws, that media companies from all over the world will relocate to Iceland, which will become the Silicon Valley of the media. Such mass immigration, it seems to me, seems unlikely. Secondly, I would ask those who propose change to consider very carefully whether adoption of American-style free speech fundamentalism is the appropriate style for Europe, appropriate model for Europe. Most countries in Europe, while having strong traditions of upholding freedom of speech, recognize there are other interests that are equally valuable that should be protected. The political and constitutional settlement in Europe is very different from that of the United States, and our histories have surely led us to value these interests differently. Exceptionalism in this respect is American in flavor, not European. Thirdly, there is virtually nothing in the IMI proposals or the Penn and Index on Censorship report that mentions the importance of reputation. Yet a false and defamatory statement spoken of another person has the capacity to cause great harm. As a consequence, throughout history, a high value has been placed on the maintenance of a good reputation. Its importance has been recognized by the European Court of Human Rights, which treats reputation as a protected interest under Article 8. Harm to reputation can be debilitating and perpetuating. Society has an interest in facilitating redress if harm is caused by the circulation of falsehoods. Now, as to specific proposals, I don't have enough time to go, so I'm conscious I'm running out of time, but I just want to say a few things about some of the proposals. Both the IMI proposals and the Penn Index on Censorship report critique the English law for the laxity of its jurisdictional rules that encourage the phenomenon of so-called libel tourism. This was characterized by Lord Pannick in the House of Lords as the bringing of proceedings by people who have no connection to this country against publishers who are based abroad, such proceedings being founded on the incidental publication in this country, in the UK, he's talking about, of a few copies of a newspaper, book, or magazine published abroad. Now, the authors of the Index and Penn report proposed changes to the existing law to tighten up the position, while IMI suggests introducing legislation similar to that adopted by some states in the US. In New York, it's called the Libel Terrorism Act, to block the enforcement of English libel judgments. Now, I appreciate the rhetorical strength of the observation that some foreign claimants choose to sue in London and not in their home jurisdiction. The implication that the regime in the UK is draconian is obvious. On analysis, however, I'm not persuaded the English rules on jurisdictions that are said to permit libel tourism are in themselves at all problematic. Contrary to the rules sometimes posited, English courts do require the claimant to demonstrate, first, that he has a reputation in England. And secondly, that defamatory publication has occurred here. Any damages recovered in the UK will relate only to the harm caused to the reputation in the UK. The courts have a discretion to strike out a claim as an abuse of process where no real and substantial tort has been committed. Secondly, public interest defence and responsible journalism. Much in the IMI report, an index on PEN report about the importance of freedom of expression in relation to matters of public interest. To protect journalism on matters of public interest, the index on PEN report recommends a public interest defence. Now, few would disagree with such a defence. In fact, there is already one in English law, even though, of course, it's open to the immediate criticism that it may lead to the sacrifice of individual reputations on the altar of the greater public good. I believe that it's only through vigorous public debate, as here, and engagement with controversial matters that truth is likely to be revealed. But if we're talking about public interest defence, beyond proof that the subject matter of the publication is in the public interest, what conditions should be met? And here we have a stark choice. Do we do as the Americans do, where we allow a defence where the writer honestly believes that what they publish is true, or do we do as English law currently does, require that the defendant has acted responsibly? You will not be surprised to know that I believe the defendant should only have a defence if they can show that they have acted responsibly. That seems to me the most appropriate standard here. So far as the internet is concerned, I think if we listen to some other people, you would think that there were virtually no protections accorded to those people who publish on the internet. Not true. Considerable protection is given to internet publishers. There is a European directive that accords immunity to information society services that act as mere conduits, cache information, and in more restricted circumstances, store information for the purpose of allowing others access. In English law, it's been said that Google and other web search engines are not liable for defamatory material contained in search snippets automatically generated by their search programs. Now, in principle, I believe that most of the existing restrictions placed on suing internet publishers are justified, but I would not be supportive of a proposal to make the internet a law-free zone. The fact is that whilst there is a considerable amount of responsible publishing on the internet, it in many respects operates as a large lavatory wall, allowing the disgruntled, angry, and deliberately deceitful to publish what frequently amounts to appallingly damaging and hurtful material. Internet service providers derive a great deal of money from allowing this stuff to be published, and they should not, in my view, be given a free ride. I could go on. I suspect I've probably, it's the last, I don't often get invited to speak at liberal events, so I suspect I probably won't be asked again. There are other matters that I could discuss, not least the question of immunity for archives, prior restraint and such matters. I think it's very important that we're having this debate. I congratulate IMI for raising this debate to the level it has been raised. But critically and importantly, as we look at the reforms they propose, I think we should recognise that there are interests other than freedom of expression, and in particular, and these interests, reputation, privacy, should not be ignored when seeking to frame new rules. Freedom of expression is not the only important right at stake. If we are to have reform, then fine, but let us be clear on what we want to achieve and why. Let the reform be based on a proper understanding of the law and its effects, and whether such reform truly benefits the public in general. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to all speakers in the panel. We're indeed here to understand the full scope of this, so the judge is still out to see whether you'll be invited again. No, but I would like to thank everybody, really, because this is very, very important to show the different perspectives, and I'm sure the audience is full of questions. At least on Twitter there were quite a few remarks here and there, so let's see who would like to ask some questions to the audience. Yes, go ahead. Or to the panel, sorry, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Jeremy Zimmerman, co-founder of citizen advocacy group La Quadrature du Net. I would like the opinion of the panel on some disturbing trend I'm seeing in EU legislation of going towards contractual censorship in the name of copyright. We saw this in the Commission's communication of September 11 on IPR enforcement that was uploaded by the Gallo report as voted in the jury committee recently. That is also encouraged by the Council and which the EU is now negotiating in ACTA. So according to this, voluntary agreements shall help to, I quote the Commission, take advantage of possible alternative to court proceedings for settling copyright disputes. In that schemes, you have operators, maybe with the use of legal liability, that will have an incentive to themselves make what is supposed in a democracy to be in the hands of the police or the justice to detect what is a supposed infraction and to take sanction, which could take the form of any kind of internet access restriction or content restriction or removal. What can the EU do to address this when it is at the same time negotiating ACTA?
Thank you very much. Right behind you, we have a member of the jury committee who indicated interest either in replying or in asking another question. Diana, please.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I actually wanted to put another comment or question. Obviously, coming from the UK, I'm very much aware of what's been said about UK law and the use of our courts as a sort of host for so-called libel tourism. But I just want to say, we tried to deal with this problem some years ago here in the European Parliament with a rather technical piece of legislation called Rome II. We actually wanted to legislate to attribute jurisdiction and applicable law. We were stopped by doing so by a huge lobby from the media. We are now revisiting that, and I shall be interested to see whether second time round there's now a greater appetite, having seen the result of not legislating. In other words, if there is a problem with jurisdiction, let's have a debate like today, and let's try and see if we can create a more level playing field where each country deals with the problems of expression that occur in each country. So that's one thing. And also the other point I did want to make, I too absolutely believe in freedom of expression, but as a liberal, I also believe in the individual right to reputation and the right to privacy. And in legislating at a European level, we have to be very careful about balancing those two liberties. And I, for one, want to see them balanced on what I would call a European basis and not on an American basis. And there I will finish.
Thank you very much. Yes, no, I'm not going to shamelessly abuse my position here. You have the third question after the first one.
I have a question for Mr. Mullis, and I don't know if he ever heard of the company Trafigura and the Probo Koala. You have been saying that libel law is not an issue, but how can it be that this morning the Dutch district attorney asked for the highest fine ever imposed on a company for an environmental crime? And given the history of the company with British media, how can you even begin to say that there is not the beginning of an issue here?
Excuse me, for the sake of all of us in the audience who haven't followed this too closely, could you just explain in 3 words what's going on there?
Okay, what has been going on that under a secret gag order that accidentally got out? We know that a newspaper has been barred from publishing about the story. Every time a Dutch journalist at a competing media I work writes about it, he gets letters from lawyers, very threatening. And then here is somebody who claims that there isn't an issue, which is at least amazing.
Okay, but the letter are from Dutch lawyers or from British lawyers?
Both.
Thank you. Okay, there we have the question. I have a question also, and that is to Birgitta. How did the discussion in Iceland deal with this issue of reputation and privacy, which is a legitimate issue, of course, because I hear that it's not mentioned in IMI. Did you deal with it? Did it come up? How did you address it? And with that, we have a number of very interesting questions: contractual censorship, alternative dispute resolution, privacy and reputation, and the discussion in Iceland, and of course the question of libel law in the UK. Birgitta, do you want to start?
Yes. The issue of reputation and child pornography was not covered in IMI because there's already existing legislation for that, so we did not feel that we're not suggesting to make anything illegal that is illegal with IMI. And I think it is actually, I'm astonished to have just listened to Mr. Muller's speech because while researching for IMI and during various interviews and various dialogues, I have actually no country has given me as much information about them being gagged as in the UK. And the journalists there are just, I hear horror stories every time I talk to a UK journalist that is a serious investigative journalist. So I'm astonished to hear this dialogue, that there is not a problem. And the same thing with liable tourism. It's an incredibly serious issue that has to be addressed now. It is just not something we can just close our eyes to. And as with this debate about we should not base our legislation or our culture on US culture, let's just face it, it's all mixed. And let's just lift this above that and try to draw the best from the laws in the US and in Europe and elsewhere if there is. So that is basically the attitude that we put into the IMI, that let's find the best possible law to ensure these rights and move beyond this US-EU debate, because we're all influenced by each other, and media doesn't have any borders anymore. So, and as with censorship, I am very much, I'm actually quite upset the way things are evolving with censorship. I think that we are going in the opposite direction of what most artists themselves want to go. And it seems to be focused on ensuring the rights of the publishers or the people. Everybody is getting money in their pocket except maybe the artist. And now artists have finally a chance to make their world available to the entire, I mean, there's a reason why a lot of artists, in particular music artists, have decided to have people donate money instead of charging. And a lot of people that have decided to have it in a more free way and in more sort of a fashion where we're dealing with the reality of the internet, have actually ended up selling more in the end. So I think we just have to focus. I feel that there is sort of a clash between the old world and the new world, the old reality and the new reality. And in some aspect, it looks like the old reality is winning in a lot of ways, and people are just not acknowledging the fact where we are at as humanity today.
I guess there are a few points I ought to respond to. This sort of notion that newspapers are gagged in England, by and large, is complete nonsense. If they publish something that is true, they have a defence. If they act responsibly, they have a defence. Seems to me that if they can't write stuff that's true, if they can't act responsibly, they ought not to have a defence in those circumstances, it seems to me. Libel tourism, again, how many cases do we... I mean, what are we talking about? Floods of tourists with their suitcases and coming to England, waterproofs, as it were, coming to sue in courts. We're talking tiny numbers, and most of these cases are struck out on the basis of an abusive process. I think the point has been made already. English law, certainly in relation to European claimants and defendants, applies European rule. Outside that, if there hasn't been a substantial tort committed in the UK, then the case is going to be struck out. Thirdly, again, something Julian Assange said, I think, earlier. This is a suggestion that that Africa has essentially taken on some of the UK's laws. We are actually one of the few jurisdictions in Europe that doesn't have criminal defamation law. Many European countries continue to have criminal defamation law. We don't in England. So I think that there is there's a real danger of UK or English law being demonised. The fact of the matter is very considerable work has been done over the last 15 years by the courts to develop the law so that it strikes a proper balance between these two interests, the Article 8 right to reputation and the Article 10 right to freedom of expression. Pushed too far, and essentially, as in the United States, if you're a public figure, a public official, you can't sue. The media can write pretty much whatever they like about you. That doesn't seem to me to be necessarily the sort of situation we want to get ourselves into in Europe.
Mr. De Winter wanted to come back in.
Yes, I started out by pointing out a case where libel law was enacted, and now apparently a district attorney comes to the inference that so a crime has been committed, so something was wrong. So libel law in the UK apparently did not work. The company Trafigura has paid huge sums of money to victims. So apparently something was happening, there was poison, the story was true, so a story was taken away from a newspaper where the facts were basically in favor of the journalist. And again, to this day, a Dutch journalist still gets, after each and every article, a threatening letter out of the UK with compliments.
Thank you. Can you comment on that case? Do you know it?
Yeah, a bit about it. Just one thing I did want to make clear. Although I'm the general editor of a book called Carter-Ruck on libel and privacy, I have nothing to do with Carter-Ruck law firm. I'm certainly not a party. I'm not a member of that law firm. I don't know the full details of the Trafigura case. I'm not sure if anybody does, but. A number of news organisations have got the facts wrong. The BBC, for example, suggested that, in fact, Trafigura had killed people. That's not true. And they paid damages.
How do you know it's not true?
Because they paid damage. Why would they pay damages? They could prove it.
Because they settled out of court for tactical reasons. You say that's not true.
But the BBC is an organisation that certainly has...
I'm through and through on this case, you know.
And?
We published the BBC's defence, which was suppressed, their entire legal defence. Okay, Carter-Ruck sent me letters about this case.
Right.
the original leaked emails we worked with The Guardian. Okay, so how do you know it's not true? According to UN report in September, 108,000 people were driven to seek medical attention in the Ivory Coast. The allegation was that the BBC produced that perhaps 14 of those people died as a result. Now, I say to you, 108,000 people go to hospital, all different types, children, old women, etc. Even just going to hospital, is it unreasonable that 14 of them died on the way in the Ivory Coast in Africa in the middle of the night? Of course, you expect 14 people to die if they're driven to hospital. And here you are saying that it is not true.
Well,
what are your facts, sir?
All I'm saying is that the BBC chose not to defend it.
No, that's not what you said. Is it?
I can't remember.
I can.
Right.
Can everyone else remember what he said? Yeah. Right.
Right. And why did the BBC choose not to defend it?
Because they viewed it might take £2 million in the UK system to defend it, and they could just drop that case and start reporting on a new case instead with that £2 million. In the UK, the burden of proof is on the publisher. Have you stopped beating your wife yet? Prove it to me. See you in court.
The alternative is if you accuse me of being a paedophile, I have to prove that I'm not.
No, that is not the alternative.
Of course it's
and the reason that the UK jurisdiction is abused so much is because the burden of proof is on the writer to prove everything. That means if you're a Ukrainian investigative journalist, and I know some that write about the electricity oligarchy in the Ukraine, in a Ukrainian newspaper, who was sued in London by that Ukrainian oligarch and couldn't afford or chose not to spend money briefing lawyers in the UK paying for that whole case. They instantly lost because they did not establish their proof burden. Furthermore, libel cases in the UK on average are 100 times the expense of libel cases in continental Europe. Now, the strategy used by Carter Ruck and other libel firms working that sector is to do what? It is to make publishers bleed. Publishers don't have much money. If you're working for a billionaire like Nahadimi Auchi, all you have to do is keep the publisher in court, keep them bleeding with legal costs. Eventually, the publishers say, we cannot sustain these legal costs anymore, therefore we're just going to pull out of the case. At the moment you pull out of the case, you haven't established your proof burden. Under the UK system, you are then liable for all your opponent's costs, the result of which is that you have to pay all the opponent's costs. You spoke about damages, but you deliberately avoided costs. Costs are normally more than damages. So that's how the whole trick works. And don't think that, you know, that people like me don't know it back and forward, because we do.
I'm well aware that you have very considerable experience with it. Sorry. I'm well aware you have very considerable experience of that. I would concede, and I'd be the first to concede, and indeed if you read what I've written, you will see that one of the things that I do think is very scandalous in England is the cost. It seems to me if you've made that accusation, the burden lies on you to substantiate and not the other way around.
Would you agree with that?
We can look at how things actually work in practice rather than going to Platonic hypotheticals. So how things actually work in practice. What's our first question? Which country is suffering from too much freedom of speech? Name it. Is there one suffering from too much freedom of speech? Come on. I only wish that were true in the United States. What? In the United States, celebrities can't function? There's no politics in the United States? I am continually vilified in the United States in all sorts of ways, and it's very annoying, okay. But okay, so I just respond. And there are processes for responding to libels, and libel law is actually important. There's an example. If we had no libel laws, we would see Coke saying that Pepsi was full of cyanide. So there are strong reasons which are politically sustainable for there to be libel laws dealing with malicious libel. But the cases in the UK, these are just extraordinary, and extraordinary abuses. And it is, in a way, it is not the law at the end that is the problem. It is the law at the beginning that is the problem. It is the process that is the problem, and it is inequitous access to justice that is the problem. That is why in the IMI, process protections are so strong, and why California has introduced anti-SLAPP legislations to stop the process itself being abused. For example, Time magazine, in writing its expose of Scientology in 1991, a country where you suggested maybe there is too much freedom of speech, Time magazine had to pay $8 million in current terms to get that case to the Supreme Court. $8 million, which they did not get back. So that is in effect an $8 million fine against Time magazine for investigative journalism exposing the abuses of a cult. Now, it won in the end, but so what? The First Amendment is strong in the end, but what about all the process protections? What about the abusive process? And that's what we see happening in the UK. It's an abusive process. It is not that people should have no redress for scandalous accusations made about them, but rather, if only billionaires have access to justice, then a particular form of justice, is it right that they have access to that form of justice? Either billionaires and other such cashed up groups have to have their access to that form of justice curtailed to level the playing field, or there must be better access to justice for everyone.
You're not going to get a great deal of disagreement from me on that. I mean, I think you are absolutely right about libel law costing too much. Again, one of the things that I've written suggesting is anti-SLAPP suits. I suspect, rather bizarrely, we're probably closer in terms of some other thinking on this than you might think, or perhaps that I've characterised.
When you made the statement that I didn't actually work for Carter Ruck, that was a good first move, because my next line was a statement by the partner of Carter Ruck about the founder, Carter Ruck, that he did for freedom of speech what the Boston Strangler did for door-to-door salesmen.
Thank you very much. I have one question back there. I recognize you afterwards. Yes, please.
Hi, how are you getting on? I'm just an intern here, and I've been researching this in the context of the recast of Rome 2 and the lacuna that was left after the last time around. They couldn't find a conflict of law rule for violations of privacy and personality rights by the mass media, because nobody could agree on it. Now, from what I've seen over the last while, the kind of debate that's happening here is very characteristic of the debate that happens generally speaking. Now, what I mean by that is there are right across the spectrum here horror stories on each side. But what we need to remember is it is a spectrum. But for instance, New York Times versus Sullivan, their constitutional exemption, which means basically you need to write something which is absolute lunacy for it to fall foul of US defamation law if the subject is a public official. That has given rise to what I would go on record as saying, US Republican style politics, which is dirty politics. If we don't calibrate this right, it affects the quality of our democracy. There are so many different rights at play. I mean, there have been, I am sure, instances of Russian oligarchs using their economic strength to silence truths about them. There have also been, I know one case that happened up in Newcastle, like two people that were working in a public institution in the UK.
Lillian Reid,
who had their lives destroyed by what transpired was a false allegation of paedophilia. I would just ask the panel that instead of, I suppose, taking such an antagonistic approach to this, ultimately these are laws that regulate our society and have a very real effect on our democracy. So do you think, for instance, that in legislating for this thing, there should be more specific laws? Because ultimately, however a law is framed, either substantively or the procedure through which it is applied will affect the balance of power. It will always have an internal bias in terms of the balance of power. And as you can see, there are instances where the balance of power is either on the side of the Russian oligarch and the poor little publisher, or the International Media Corporation and the person who's working for a public authority in Newcastle. So how do you think we should legislate better on this at a European level?
Thank you very much. Please, sir.
Andrew Culling from New Europe newspaper. I didn't think it would take too long before we got onto Peter Carter-Ruck, really. I'm just wondering if part of the problem with the process is to do with some of the institutions. For example, in some of these cases and troubling cases, I keep hearing Carter-Ruck, I keep hearing Shillings, and I keep hearing of judgments by Justice Eadie. Is this a coincidence?
Do you want to come in first this time?
Yes. I will answer the first question first. So you spoke about that you hear certain stories about this, that, and the other, and these are important in relation to how we balance democratic interactions. So my first question to you is, how do you know? Did someone tell you that? Because if they told you, they were using words. So you can see, even in the debate about whether people have privacy rights, people are using the right to speech to communicate their need for privacy rights. In fact, every piece of legislation, every constitution is grounded on nothing but speech. And so, to some very real and important sense, the right to communicate knowledge and the ability to communicate knowledge is above most other rights, because other rights derive from those communications. So we must take great care when we abridge the right to freedom of speech, because in doing so, we abridge all other rights which themselves cannot draw attention to their plight without speech. So I think it's important to keep that frame of understanding whenever we consider abridging the rights of speech or creating regimes that produce incentives for people to self-censor. But in relation to, so as an example, I spoke about this case where if you don't have a right for redress to malicious libel, then you'll instantly see Coke saying Pepsi has cyanide in it. And so that is, those forms of abuses lead very quickly to libel laws of particular types. But I would be extremely hesitant about saying that there is this US exceptionalism. There is an ideal in the United States which derives from the French Revolution, which was coincidental in time with the US Revolution. That is in fact the European ideal, born out of the French experience and born out of the experience of pamphleteers and US revolutionaries in dealing with the British. What was the second question?
How best to legislate?
Oh yeah, how best to legislate? Well, I mean, I gave my ideas to this IMI proposal, and I think that is, in fact, a pretty good balance. Not to offend any power group in particular, but instead to provide a supportive framework for the ideas that all of us want to get out in our respective sectors. All of us have a need to communicate what is hurting us and what we hope for, and we should be very cautious about any maneuver which abridges that ability to communicate to each other, to the public, and most importantly, in some degree, to history itself. When the historical record is no longer accurate, doesn't have integrity, then really we are all adrift as a civilization, and that is something that is happening in the United Kingdom, but is also happening elsewhere in Europe.
Thank you. Then the question also about the institutions. Do we have the right institutions to deal with this?
I really don't think that I am qualified to answer for Europe in that particular question, but I would actually like to address the issue of who are the laws written for. Are there two sets of laws? This is a prominent question that we have been asking ourselves in Iceland recently, because it really hurts to see the rich people that basically vacuum cleaned the banks of Iceland, getting away with not being charged. And the first people that are charged in Iceland after the revolution are people protesting. It's totally outrageous. And what does it do to the way we see law? It makes us completely lose all belief in that the law is fair for everybody. So I have to ask, who is, for who is the law? And do we have to address this fact when we're dealing as well with freedom of information and speech? Who has the freedom of speech? Is it all of us? Who has the freedom of access to information? Is it all of us? And who has the freedom of expression? I think this is a very serious issue that we need to address, not only here, but we have to really take this further. And I think too much time has been spent in discussing sort of the micros in this. We really have to go back into looking at the bigger, broader picture here, so that we can go back home with some hope that there will actually be some profound change. And since I decided to speak very briefly earlier, I just want to stress the importance that all of you who are interested in strengthening these legislations in your own countries and in the European Union, please use IMI as an inspiration, as a cornerstone for pushing your own government to lobby for these rights. Because if we don't have these, if freedom of information, speech and expression is only for a chosen few, and if we will live in a reality where the historical records are taken out of the main media, then we don't, as legislators, we don't have the full scope to make enlightened decisions, and the general public does not have the necessary information to be able to push their legislators into the direction they want them to go. So I think this is a very profound issue that we need to look into. And in particular, I noticed, and I know that it is difficult to sit here being a lawyer from the UK and hearing all these criticism about the UK law, but it is extremely disturbing to me knowing that the historical records, in particular in the big respected media in the UK, are being altered every month, every week, because the fact is that most of the news, that the entire international media pulls news out of the UK, in particular from the BBC, from the Independent and so forth. It's a very respected media. Now, if you're only getting fragments of what is really happening, we are skewing, we're changing the way we see reality, and we're getting a very false image of what reality is really all about, because they're taking out all the serious news, dealing with very serious issues, and giving us medium news about medium issues. So we can't, as a world, tackle the serious issues. So just want to address this.
And maybe for my own knowledge, as we're trying to get a sense of this, I'm not aware of this, and perhaps either the lawyer knows or Birgitta, or the professor, I'm sorry, knows, or Birgitta knows. Have there been cases against this practice of erasing historic records of news sources? Have people challenged this practice in a court of law?
So yes, there was a case about this in the Strasbourg Human Rights Court, and it found that every time someone reads something on the internet, it is publishing it afresh, and that European states can introduce an archive protection, as if you like, a statute of limitations on when such actions can occur, but there was no European-wide view as to what that was. And it was left up to member states as to define their own archive protection rules. In New York, it's 1 year statute of limitations for libel. In the IMI proposal, it's 2 months. In France, I understand that it is 3 months for libel. So this is a very important issue. I mean, if you're the Guardian and you're publishing every day and you're building up a collection of material, which you'd normally think, which is a valuable, extremely valuable historic asset to all of us, but from a publisher's perspective, it is an asset to readers and therefore some kind of institutional asset which it can sell and market and keep its institutional integrity from. But currently, it is an ever-increasing pile of undetermined liabilities. And that's a terrible thing for publishers, to be sitting on ever-increasing pile of liabilities. The precedent in the UK, which dates back to the 19th century, in relation to a libel hearing that occurred 18 years after, is that, in fact, there is no limit to when a case may be brought forward. And the problem is, you think, well, what is the damages 18 years after? I mean, it's just ridiculous. But remember how I told you how things work in practice. This is not about what the court finds in the end. This is about how you abuse the process in the interim in order to get what you want, which is the publisher to fold. So it's enough that someone is able to bring a case to have a suppressive effect, to have a chilling effect, both after publication and coercing publications to redact things from their records, and also producing a general climate where people are fearful to publish certain things about certain people. After that material was removed from The Guardian about Nahdimi Auchi and several other UK papers in 2008, there was nothing about Nahdimi Auchi in the main UK papers for over a year, until we managed to have the issue brought up in a hearing at Westminster in order to get parliamentary privilege to mention this individual's name.
Let me just say 2 words about the question about the institutions, how we deal with this in an institutional way. As you know, we have different national legislations, and generally speaking, this is considered a competence of our member states. However, we have divergent legislation there, and we also have divergent process law. So the process law in the United Kingdom is very different from the law in say, Germany or France. The regulations for cost are different when it actually comes to a court case. In Germany, for example, there was a lady who had been dragged into the public arena without her knowing it by a very well-known entertainer because she had a particularly funny regional dialect when she pronounced a particular German word. Those who speak German here, it's Maschendrahtzaun. So, and she could get redress without having to fear excessive cost. Now, when Diana Wallace spoke about Rome II, that is about cross-border non-contractual obligations, which is the choice of which legislation do you apply. I mean, which law do you apply to your particular case? That might make things a little bit easier, but it's still only a way to choose a national law. So at the European level, what our institutions can do is open to question. I have just opened here the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, which of course binds the EU institutions, but it's very clear in Article 11, freedom of expression and information. I just read it. I'm going to read it to you because it's quite interesting for our discussion. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. I think that's quite a strong and interesting statement. Maybe something is going to flow from this at the European level, at the ECJ. We will have to see. But generally speaking, institutionally, I think the European Union is not yet in a position where we can say it's very easy, let's just do a regulation and we'll get this thing dealt with in a satisfactory manner for journalists, for bloggers, for everybody who's involved in this new space that we have here. So we have an institutional debate, we have a legal debate, we have a political debate, and I think we need to find the best way of how to deal with this in an institutional way in the months and years to come.
Can I just pick up? I mean, I thought what you were saying was absolutely right. I mean, there is a spectrum of views here. You've heard some of those views expressed today, and in a sense, the balance we strike between, on the one hand, reputation, on the other hand, freedom of expression, tells us an awful lot about the sort of society in which we want to live. I have the greatest respect, surprisingly, for everything that Julian Assange has done at WikiLeaks. But I guess on this particular issue, his starting point, wholly understandably, is freedom of expression. And he puts forward a very, very eloquent and elegant case for saying that is essentially the prior right. I still maintain that, in a sense, this is about balancing right. In a sense, that I think is the choice that you have. Do you see this, as I do, in a sense, as being about balancing rights that essentially ought to be given equal weight, or do you take the view that Mr. Assange takes, that essentially it's freedom of speech? And I don't think you're saying that reputation has no importance, but you're just saying that it has priority.
Yeah, I see some more questions, but I did want to bring up the question to everyone in going further in this discussion. Does this have to be a zero-sum game? Because it doesn't seem to me that it can only be either or, because specifically as liberals we are the strongest defenders of the right to privacy, for example. And so I find it hard to begin with the starting point that this is a spectrum where there's always a loss. So I would like to look at how both can be included. But let's also take some other questions. The gentleman in the front. You. Microphone.
First of all, it is an answer to Professor Mullis. How do we see this? We see this as one of the most important questions of our society today. We see that our society is not in touch with the true information at this moment, and our politicians are not taking decisions based on the true information, and they are not receiving the true information because the media is censoring themselves. There is a whole lot of issues that the media will not touch, will not go near, while it is proven 10,000 times scientifically to be the physical reality of things. So we do need the Icelandic initiative to bring out the truth and back to the media and to reform the media to actually do its job to inform the public, to inform the politicians. I think that we have, I'm a medical doctor. I have, very recently we had this little, the H1N1, okay? We all discussed that very much, and we discussed it here at the ALDE, and I'm thanking the ALDE for that. There was about 209 delegates of the European Parliament who voted to analyze what had happened with this, and because of the reputation of the European Medical Authority was actually put into question, it was actually killed, this proposition to investigate the wrongdoings that were done and how this was tested on the European population. I'm a Swedish medical doctor, and I can tell you that as colleagues of mine who teach general practice medicine in Sweden, they went out and they explained very clearly why this was an experimentation on the population. And the next day, they were told to shut up. They were told that they had just the right to shut their mouth and to tell that if personally they would not like to take the shot themselves. But the Swedish medical authorities, like dangerous transmission authorities, asked them to shut up. Now, that actually led to that about 60% of the Swedish population received a dangerous and experimental shot. And here in Belgium, where we were allowed to talk about it, between 2.5% or 10%, depending on which media was talking about the issue, got this experimental and dangerous shot. I think that it was a decision by the European Parliament to protect the reputation of the EMA that decided that we kill this issue and do not investigate it. That is just one small issue. I think that other issues are extremely important. For example, why we do not discuss the issue of how did the towers come down in New York. Everybody knows, anybody has any bit of physical knowledge knows that the official story that is still being pushed by the media, still 9 years afterwards is still being pushed by the media, has no possibility in physics, okay? So why is the media not talking about this? This is extremely important for our media, and I would say for my colleague, the Pakistani journalist, that he was talking about why is our media here in the West looking at only the issues of cultural differences in the Muslim population. In fact, they are being completely clobbered by bombs based on lies that we continue to cover here in our media, here in Europe. And that is our closed society. Our closed society is not dealing with the reality. And I'm trying to have us to open our society and really talk about the truth, okay? The truth, the physical truth. Thank you.
Question in the back.
Hi, I'm Len Sassaman. I'm a researcher at KU Leuven here in Belgium. Going back to the mention of the Charter on Human Rights and freedom of expression, how does the panel feel about anonymous speech? Whistleblowers. Obviously, there's a trade-off between a culture that protects whistleblowers and protects anonymous speech, and the willingness for whistleblowers to come forward. A country that that permits strong technological mechanisms of protecting somebody's identity and allowing them to convey messages and ideas anonymously is going to have less of a potential chilling effect on one that that records who says what over the internet, for instance. How does the panel feel, and how do we rectify the EU data retention laws with whistleblowing protections?
Thanks, Len. Very interesting question. Well, of course, you know, running an anonymous whistleblowing site, you all know what my answer is going to be. That, well, of course, we must protect the right to communicate anonymously to the public. There is an redress is important. I gave you this case before of Coke saying that Pepsi is full of cyanide. So in understanding that issue, we need to look at who in the process can redress be taken from and what chilling effects are there if there are not anonymous abilities to communicate to the public anonymously. So, I mean, the jurisprudence comes in the United States out of a political understanding that during the US independence movement that the pamphleteers had to publish anonymously because they were publishing underground in response to acts by the British. And those pamphlets were, no doubt, contained some elements of hyperbole and rumour as well as truth. And people, in understanding that they were receiving an anonymous product, not a mislabeled product, but an anonymous source of communication, understood that because of the lack of ability to identify the author, that you would have to go on the internal facts and you would have to treat things suspiciously until a body came forward to authenticate the information, which had a reputation. So I don't think that anonymous communications are really a problem for people's good reputations. Because if they are anonymous and there is no person backing them up, people treat the information as not yet proved or circumspect. I mean, there's anonymous publications about the stuff that we do, which are completely fabricated top to bottom, but no one, I mean, I'm not concerned, other people are not concerned, they're not treated with any sort of authority until people investigate them. Now, I think your question was trying to get at the data protection aspects, and that is an issue, and that issue has been dealt with to a degree in the in the Constitutional Court in Germany a few months ago, which found that in fact that the European Data Protection Initiative was in fact unconstitutional in relation to the German Constitution, and the records obtained so far must be destroyed, and in fact were destroyed. So Germany's view was that there could be, in theory, such a directive, but it would have to be strictly limited, and it could only, there must be exemptions for journalists and ministers receiving confessions and so on. You know, often anonymity, if we look at, say, bank transactions, there's no doubt that anonymity is used to further antisocial behaviour very frequently. But if we're going to look at what sort of anonymous activity should be regulated, I would much prefer people started with how Europe routes money through the Cayman Islands every day, rather than how it communicates facts on the internet.
You have a quick follow-up?
I just wanted to clarify that my actual concern is the chilling effect on citizens who go to WikiLeaks.org or go to email their MEP and do so knowing that for a year it's possible for someone to investigate and discover that they were the one who sent that email or they were the one who connected to that website. Now there are technologies like Tor, but I make my living breaking it. So when somebody has to go through extra hoops to try to essentially circumvent these laws through legal means, or just live with them, there's going to be some amount of chilling effect.
It's a tax on communication.
I guess what my question is, should we look at the Germany decision and go, they're right, the data retention law was a bad idea, these protections were in the Constitution in the first place, and as the rest of Europe look at that and say, okay, let's back off and be less strict about logging everything everyone does? Or should we try to weasel around it so that it fits with the German, so the Germans can adopt it finally? I'm obviously of the former camp, that the world hasn't crumbled because of anonymity on the internet. We've had, you mentioned the Federalist Papers as an example there. We've had, as part of Western culture, anonymous pamphleting, particularly British culture, for centuries. And it's only the internet that has given us, it's given us immense power to communicate over the entire globe and reach billions of people, but it's also given us immense surveillance power. And I believe Holland still has, in effect, the data retention law. The Netherlands has, in effect, the data retention law. So if you know that your ISP is recording every time you go and hit WikiLeaks, are you likely to do it? That's the concern.
Yeah, well, it's a concern to me, and I think the best place to look for whether that concern is a real one is China, because there are a number of ways of evading the Great Firewall of China, that censorship blockade that exists around that entire nation, in its the ability blockades its citizens from reading what is written in the rest of the world. And now I understand also what SMSs are sent. And you can see we have published a number of those censorship lists, including ones for Baidu, the Chinese version of Google, also censors. In fact, if you go to Baidu, set your language to Chinese and search for wikileaks.org, your connection will drop and you will not be able to search for anything for 20 minutes. So in speaking with Chinese citizens about whether they try and get around that firewall or not, it became very clear that, in fact, they self-censor. So they're not, to some degree, so concerned about the firewall, because if you want to, you can get around it. It's a little bit of effort, but you can actually do it. What they're concerned about is the logging, in that all their access attempts to these foreign sites are logged, and their access attempts to proxies or Tor or these other mechanisms to get around the censorship firewall is combined with a surveillance system. And the surveillance system means that if you're then going for a job somewhere, or your brother's then going for a job somewhere in a Chinese ministry or local bureaucracy, this information may come up and be used against you to prevent betterment or in some bureaucratic fight. So yes, surveillance is a serious problem for stopping people communicating what they really think and feel.
It's potentially getting worse too. There's a MEP Modi from, pronouncing that wrong, from Italy has proposed that content providers and search engines implement something similar to the data retention logging. So it's foreseeable that Twitter could be required to record all Twitters. WikiLeaks, if it wants to operate in the EU, could be required to log everyone who's accessed that site.
We won't do that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions on this particular issue? If not, I have a question perhaps also to ask of our panel. Is there one? I'm sorry. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Well, I was wanting to move on to another issue, if I may, which was trailed in the first part by Rose Fleming in his video interview. But it's an area of law that we haven't touched on so far, which is the area of anti-discrimination law. and the deadening effect that can have on freedom of speech, particularly the hate speech and the harassment provisions that quite often go with it. We're now at a stage where we're seeing coming through in case law the effects of this in various Northern European jurisdictions where national laws are in force, and in Julian's Fair Island in the Pacific as well. And we have to be aware of this and to reflect on it, because, as many will know, there is a proposal currently to carry these sort of principles into law right across the EU in what's known as the Equal Treatment Directive. I would like just to refer to a couple of cases, 2 or 3 cases, to show you what is potentially going to happen if these sort of laws are enforced elsewhere and not limited, as Flemming recommended, just to incitement to violence. One concerns a hotel in Liverpool, in England, where the couple running the hotel were engaged in a conversation by one of their guests one evening, who was a Muslim, and opened up the conversation saying, well, Jesus couldn't possibly be the Son of God, and gave the reasons. They, happening to be Christians, explained their particular beliefs and gave their reasons and thought no more of it. But in fact, a police investigation followed, a court case was brought against them on hate speech grounds. As a result of that publicity, their takings at the hotel went down by 80%. They eventually won their case, but they're losing their business. In Australia, a couple of Christian pastors who were in fact refugees from persecution in a Muslim country made some statements in a church meeting about Islam sometimes having an aggressive face, which ended up with proceedings being taken against them and them being subject to a quite substantial fine. In his summing up, one of the judges in his remarks made a statement to the effect that the mere fact that a statement is true is no defense. That's the sort of problem with other religions, if you like, the cartoonists' problem. There's also the problem with comedians. And a lot of you will know of a guy called Rowan Atkinson, who is well known for his portrayal of Mr. Bean. He has been actively campaigning in the UK against new laws on hate speech and on homophobia for these very reasons of the deadening effect of freedom of speech and artistic creativity. And when I'm mentioning him, I really would want to mention, and it's been touched on briefly, the jurisprudence of the Strasbourg Court on freedom of speech, where they say very clearly freedom of speech has to include freedom to offend. I'm just quoting from a particular decision here. Freedom of speech rights in Article 10 is applicable not only to information or ideas that are favourably received or regarded as inoffensive or as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock, or disturb the state or any other sector of the population. Such are the demands of pluralism, tolerance, and broad-mindedness, without which there is no democratic society. And yet many of these non-discrimination laws that are coming in include provisions against offending particular groups and give a burden of proof against the person who is making the statements or is doing the actions. And just lastly, briefly, clergymen, ministers of religion. We had a case in the UK of a Church of England bishop being subject to investigation by the police for remarks that he made about sexual morality. In Sweden, many of you will know the case of a Protestant pastor who was taken to court for a sermon he made in church on what the Bible had to say about a particular form of sexual conduct, which resulted in the conviction, which was eventually, I'm happy to say, overturned on appeal. But these are just a few of many, many cases where non-discrimination laws are having the effect of very seriously chilling freedom of speech. And while with Flemming Rose, I would say that where there is incitement to violence, yes, we must be tough on that. But beyond that, there must be freedom to exchange opinions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Birgitta.
Well, I just totally agree with you. And I think that, you know, when I was discussing the IMI proposal, both to journalists and people that care about these things in Iceland and abroad, I was always asked to draw the line. And I said, it is not my responsibility to draw this line. I refuse to draw this line. And that is my answer. I refuse to draw this line. We do have the right to offend. We do have the right. Once I will start to put into a paper what is suitable and what is not suitable, I will make myself the supreme judge of what is right and what is wrong, and that is not my responsibility. So that's all I have to say about that.
I wouldn't just dissent for one moment from what both of you have just said, but I guess I was very struck by something Mr. Tahir said earlier, which is that although we have a right to offend, we of course also have a right to choose not to offend. And there is a sort of sense in which it seems to me if we can engage in dialogue those people who do not share our views in a way in which we do not immediately start by offending, we perhaps are more likely to come to an agreement at the end of the day. Perhaps that's wishful thinking, but.
I just wanted to say briefly that I do believe that fighting discrimination is very, very important, but it all depends on by which measures. So, for example, let's say, unequal pay for equal job. That's discrimination based on could be on gender, which we see very frequently in Europe, or it's unequal treatment. Those are objective or measurable standards, and I think that the challenge with being offended, feeling offended, or offending as such is that it's so incredibly subjective, because what is an offense to one person could be a compliment to another, and that's not even exaggerated. So this is a very murky territory, and I believe it was either Julian or someone else who in the introduction raised the issue that out of fear to be called a racist or discriminating, there can already be a hesitance to express. And laws in this respect are only the last resort. They are, of course, fundamental because they shape the frame, but I do think as politicians and as opinion makers and as citizens, we have a huge responsibility to give space to as open a debate and to make people capable and resilient to take part in a critical but open debate, because the law should really only be the last resort. And until that, I think we should create as much space as possible to address differences, senses of humor, pieces of art, pieces of opinion, information, what have you, without having to go to a court. But if we do, it needs to be objectively measurable points. And indeed, discrimination needs to be fought based on those, but not based on some sort of subjective conception of what words or other expressions should be interpreted as.
On this, I'm not going to comment because I agree, but Philip Roth's book, The Human Stain, is quite instructive. It's not his strongest literary work, but I think it's a very good discussion of this particular topic. There's a question in the back there.
Yeah, I wanted to raise a question that kind of arises out of some of the things that Professor Mullis has said so far. A lot of your remarks have had to do with the law as a sort of upholder of balance, which surprises me because as a question of legal philosophy, this is interesting to me, because I mean the point of the law is not to ensure balance; it's to ensure justice. And a question I really have to ask is: in whose interest is it for the media to suppress itself? In whose interest is it for the media to be suppressed at all? My Latin is pretty awful, but there is a rather well-known legal principle whose name translates to "who benefits." So I have to ask: is it just when governments and powerful people are able to manipulate the media at the expense of everyone else? Who benefits? Is it just when people are able to claim that criticism is the same thing as hate speech and therefore suppress any criticism in the public dialogue of their actions. Who benefits? Is it just when whistleblowers are denied anonymity? Who benefits?
Well, of course, you can't expect me to disagree with any of the things you've just said. I mean, I guess if I go back to the original question, when you pose the question, well, what is justice? It seems to me in this particular case that we have a very difficult question to answer, which is on the one hand, we have the rights of individuals to their reputation. And on the other hand, we have the right to freedom of expression. And in a sense, achieving justice in there does require us to reach a balance between those two rights, it seems to me. I don't see how there's a problem with that.
Well, it seems okay. So you're couching this in terms of the right to one's reputation versus the right to freedom of expression, but it seems to me, at least, that a lot of the instances we see of suppression of the media have to do with maintaining a reputation which has not been rightfully earned.
Then fine, that's a different issue. We're talking. When I talk about reputation, I'm talking about protecting a reputation that one deserves.
Okay.
I mean, the whole, so now, there are undoubtedly people, Julian Assange has mentioned this, in England who have protected reputations they did not deserve, and I would concede, without question, that in a sense we need to look very seriously at the processes we've got in place. But it seems to me that the law of defamation is all about protecting, or should be all about protecting, deserved reputations. But of course there is also this other very, very powerful interest of freedom of expression. And there is a trade-off between the two.
So I think, again, this is where it gets back to the who benefits question. When Julian brought up the Ukrainian journalist who wrote the article critical of a Ukrainian oligarch, the oligarch files a defamation suit because the oligarch wants to preserve a reputation which is no longer earned, and the law is enabling him to benefit when I think you and I would both agree that he ought not to.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I think I come back that a sense, if you look at the substantive law in England, I think it does maintain a proper balance. But and this is, I think, where Julian and I would agree completely, that in terms of the procedure, in terms of the cost regime, no, it is weighted, or can be weighted, against defendants. Although, I have to say, of course, for a lot of these defendants are large media companies, and to describe them as sort of impecunious defendants doesn't seem to be entirely accurate, albeit that the sums of money at stake are huge.
Well, you can run anyone out of money if you wait long enough. But
follow up on the large media companies, because that is true. Although most of those large media companies are going broke, and some, like The Guardian, are non-profit organisations or non-profit trusts. One of the reasons that they are large media companies is because if you're a small media company, you just can't survive. And if you're an individual, you cannot survive. You cannot write serious journalism about powerful figures. It's just impossible. Your internet host will immediately take down your content because you do not control it yourself, because you're not large enough to be an internet service provider yourself. Whereas The Guardian is its own internet service provider and has lawyers to defend itself. So that is something that we have had to do. We have had, in order to publish our material, become a multinational company, ringed by lawyers, using the laws of different states for protection and using the political process for our protection. Now, that is something that we specialized in from the very beginning. So we're a specialized niche publisher to do just that. And we've spent an enormous amount of resources in doing that. And if we were a for-profit company, we would not be competitive with other media companies if we were wholly a media company, because we'd be spending so many of our resources, our potential profits, on simply defending ourselves and structuring our operations so we could publish freely. So initiatives like IMI are very important to shake up the centralization of media control, centralization of media ownership, which is pernicious for all sorts of other reasons. So anyway, that's sort of an unintended consequence of, or maybe it is an intended consequence of access to courts that are expensive, and most court actions are expensive, is it filters out all small publishers. And what we're really seeing now in the United Kingdom is that it's now starting to filter out the big publishers as well. It's become so adverse.
I don't know if anyone has already posed this
Could you
question.
introduce yourselves, please?
I'm Rui Tavares. I'm here an MEP in the Civil Liberties Committee. I don't know if anyone has posed the question of incitement to violence and genocide, for instance, which is really a difficult question. It's a dilemma for many of us. I think that many people would agree that, for instance, the radio that has incited people to commit genocide in Rwanda would be as guilty of genocide, or at least will be also guilty of genocide, as well as the people who were holding the machetes. That there is a clear link between creating an environment and emitting hateful speech and telling people to go ahead and kill the other tribe or ethnic group, and the people that do it. And since many people would agree that they are also guilty, many people will agree that they should be tried for it post facto. Then the question arises if we should have provisions on law against incitement to violence and incitement to genocide pre facto, because of course with genocide it's the kind of thing that we would like to act before it happens. So it creates a difficult dilemma to answer from the libertarian point of view on freedom of speech, which I myself share with many of us in this room. The second part will be just it's a common complaint on part of the Parliament. I am jealous of the Icelandic Parliament for having the possibility of having such an initiative. And we might as well, if we are speaking about freedom of expression and censorship, remember everybody in the room that the European Parliament lives under what we could call a political version of censorship, since we are elected by 500 million inhabitants of this continent, and we do not have legislative initiative. We could, if we had, do something as you have done in Iceland, and that I congratulate you for. So when a next change of treaty happens, and I'm sure that Marietta and others here have many good ideas as how to come around this and still protect freedom of speech at the European Union level, but of course that we should have in a legislative initiative at the very least for everything that is cross-border or trans-European issues, as we have here regarding the UK libel law. So in the next change of treaties, which will be sooner than most of people think, I hope that the citizens will push for this, because it will be an important tool in order to protect freedom of expression in Europe.
Thank you. On incitement to violence, I sense there was a large degree of agreement on the panel, actually.
You raised this interesting issue about Rwanda and incitement to violence in Rwanda. Now, I think it's interesting that you've raised it. It's not so interesting in practice, but I find it interesting that we're talking about freedom of speech and you're raising a real extraordinary outlier in this case, that In fact, let's imagine, had there been a law to prevent incitement to genocide. Well, let's look at the other incitement to genocide that occurred in 2003 in the United States by Fox News. Now, can we imagine that a law, if it had been in existence in the United States, preventing incitement to genocide, would have stopped that war, would have stopped Fox News broadcasting in the way that it did, and the other publications, including the BBC, championing that war? Of course not. No, genocides happen because the powerful group in the state wants a genocide to happen for domestic reasons, to centralize its power. And so, no national law is going to be of any assistance whatsoever in that case, but presumably will be used by the majority who controls the coercive force, that is, the majority who is able to carry out punishments and meter out the law, will be used against minorities, but you never have a genocide if it is the minority that is pushing the genocide, because the majority protects itself. So I think such a law would be very dangerous. Now, if you want to talk about a law against genocides at a pan-European level, trying to stop genocides within European countries, that's perhaps a little bit more interesting. But then you bring into how would you carry out such a law if the majority of people in a state or the majority of power in a state was intent on doing something? How would Europe deal with that? And we actually all kind of know the real answer to that. It depends on what the political will is within European nation states on the day. So that's the real answer, the political will.
I would also like to add something, because I think it is, one of those far borders of freedom of expression, and it's actually up to a judge, I think, to decide on a case-by-case basis, because it will often not be one person who stands up and calls for genocide, but there's usually apparatus in place of communications, of incitement. That's not just one individual saying something, but it's a whole mechanism that touches upon a whole number of other issues of indoctrination or influencing large numbers of people. At least as important is to make a resilient society where people don't blindly follow any kind of incitement to do whatever, because I think that's the real risk. How come, or how is it possible that people even feel interested in blindly following, or not blindly, but at least following such extreme calls for violence? So I think that is at least as important, and also the slippery slope leading up to that. But when it comes to prohibiting any kind of speech, I often think about the label that exists in the United States on records, on CDs, when they were still more in fashion than they are today with online music, but where it said, parental guidance, advised explicit language on this CD. I don't think there could have been a better marketing tool for CDs, because how cool is it to have, vulgar language on your CD? So I think sometimes banning something actually makes it much bigger than it would be if it would have just found its proportionate place in a resilient society and an open debate. So I just wanted to add that. And
but can I just add something on the genocide dimension? I believe we don't need a pan-European regulation against genocide, because we have it in the form of the Statute of the International Criminal Court. I mean, it's very clear. It's one of the crimes that is being banned. There's a convention in the United Nations concerning genocide. I happen to disagree also on Fox News and the BBC here. Fox News was certainly unpleasant, but the Iraq War, which was, whatever you may think about it, was not genocidal. And the BBC actually at the time had the nickname the Baghdad Broadcasting Corporation, because they were perceived to be broadcasting the Iraqi perspective. Anyway, I believe that incitement to violence is something on which there's consensus in terms of that it should be outlawed. It's very difficult, even in the United States. I served in my previous life at the German embassy in Washington, D.C., and I was supposed to go after websites in the United States that denied the Holocaust. And of course, I mean, you can imagine how enthusiastic my American interlocutors were when I came to them and told them, well, actually, we don't like that. Could you take it down? And they said, well, sorry, no. So we had to look for incitement to violence as a kind of way around that, which is extremely hard to find, to define. There is some legal definition on sharing knowledge and actually conspiring to commit violence, but conspiracy to commit such an act is usually not found on publicly accessible websites. So I had a bit of a difficult task there, as you can imagine, trying to achieve anything there. But when it becomes specific, I think it should be, and that's your question also, it should be ex ante, of course, that action is taken, and I think this is an issue for our authorities to really deal with this up front. I mean, this is, you mentioned Radio Milkolin from Rwanda. We've had something in Bosnia, much closer to home, not too long ago, which the Dutch are sadly familiar with, of course. It's something that we should all be out on the watch. But I think Maritje's point about resilient societies, that's really key.
Our colleague Christian Engström has been wishing to ask a question for.
Just because you were saying that you envy Iceland for being small and being able to pass that sort of proposal. The way I saw this passing of this proposal was not only a victory in a sense for creating a debate and creating, hopefully, having all the laws passed the way we have tasked the government to pass them, but it was also an incredible victory for democracy in the sense that it has never, ever happened in the Icelandic parliament that proposal or a bill by a parliamentarian with such an incredibly, decision-making or defying where we're heading into the future has been passed. I mean, there was one party that had been in opposition for 10 years did not only have one minority bill passed. So, and for me, I started to look at and I had a big debate about who controls and who makes laws. It is certainly not us, the legislators, that are in the parliament. It is some other entities, which are the ministries. And often it is not even the ministers that define all the little, the small text in the legislations, and often laws are passed that nobody has any idea about what they are voting for. So I think it is really time for the legislators, not only in Iceland, I hope that I will use IME as an example for other parliamentarians from other parties to bring more power to the parliament itself and to take away the power from those that should actually be tasked to do the stuff we ask them to do, because we are indeed representing the people. And it's not some lawyers and ministries that should be taking the course for nations. Definitely, we should reverse it again. I don't like that trend at all, and I had no idea that it was so bad until I actually stumbled into Parliament a year ago. So I encourage all MPs or MEPs to use IMI also for an example on how the parliaments and parliamentarians should have much more weight in decision-making and defining what course we're heading into.
I'm Christian Engström. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Swedish Pirate Party. I sit in the Green Group here. A question for Mrs. Jonsdottir, and I think you partially answered it. It was going to be, what happens next? I mean, this law was passed a couple of weeks ago. Do you see anything more happening in Iceland, what's next?
All right, just to clarify some misunderstanding. This was actually passed at 3 o'clock in the morning, 16th this month, and the law has not been written. Because we had a long sort of debate and decision-making about should we make a bill or proposal where we task the government to do this. And we decided, instead of making a bill, because we would have had to make many bills tasking, because we're asking 4 ministries or telling them to change laws, about 13 laws. So we were advised from the lawyers on committee level in the Parliament that it would be more efficient and more likely we would push it through if we would do this as a proposal. And then we asked the Ministry of Culture to be the supervisory and looking after that the other ministries also do what they have been tasked to do. The beautiful thing about all of this is that it certainly has had wind in its sails the entire time. Like I said earlier, nobody really believed that this could actually ever pass. I mean, usually they kill parliamentary proposals in committees and it go into long coma, and then maybe 20 years later somebody discovers it and tries to push it through again. So from my discussions with the Minister of Culture, or my understanding is that she is already on it, and the time frame would be somewhere between a year and a half for all the laws to have passed. It is not going to happen in one day, so we have to celebrate each and every step and also keep our eyes open that they're not changing what we have tasked them to do and making it softer, because we want to have the best possible laws for each and every section of this proposal. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Because this might just be the opportunity. While you're considering any other questions, let me just say the following. We've had a number of people asking through Twitter whether we could provide a video of this whole event. We will, the ALDE group will, but we will do so in the course of this week or next week, and we cannot be quicker, but if anyone wishes to leak another version, please do. We do want to welcome you to a reception outside to continue talking in a more informal manner. So I'm just going to ask again if there's another question. Yes, in the back, go ahead.
I just wanted to make one correction regarding Fox News and incitement to genocide. It may not have been Fox News itself, but I believe if you review Ann Coulter's quotes, there will be things that could be argued to be incitement to genocide.
And Ann Coulter?
A prominent commenter. If you can say prominent Fox News commentator, that's the woman I'm talking about. The commentators on Fox News have said things which, at least under European understanding of incitement to violence, would qualify. So I don't know that you can blame Fox News for what their commentators say, but I just wanted to.
Well,
you dismissed
no
it pretty
mistake,
quickly,
yeah.
and I don't think you can.
Make no mistake about it, I don't agree with what was broadcast on Fox News in 2003, and I think if you mentioned Ann Coulter, I have a book in my bookshelf that has its title, How to Talk to a Liberal If You Must. So you've just experienced that for a couple of hours.
She, at one point, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, called for forced conversion to Christianity or death.
Or bomb the country until it's a parking lot or something like that.
Bomb the country until it's a parking lot. Is that, if that's not incitement to genocide, what is?
Of course, but Julian is right in the answer where only gross incitement to genocide would be spotted by a judge. And more subtle kinds of incitement to genocide will be able to pass, because you cannot pinpoint where it is, where it really starts. But there is still a point that extreme and gross incitement to genocide should be prohibited, and then you have a point where freedom of expression is not absolute. And then you have to make all the arguments for freedom of expression in all other fields much stronger, because you've already admitted that one.
Well, to further a comment that was made here about resilient societies, but I think that needs to be unpacked a bit, what a resilient society is. So what I believe was being gotten at is that a resilient sphere of ideas. And when you have bad speech including that we should all go out and kill another group, that speech can be counteracted and shown to be dangerous or false or misleading if there is a healthy media sector and people can communicate freely. And, you know, it is actually interesting that Sweden and the United States for the past 200 years and Australia have not suffered totalitarianism. Now, in the case of the United States and perhaps Australia as well, you can talk about the geographic diversity perhaps playing a role. But perhaps also it is this climate of some degree of free speech in those countries that has prevented them from becoming dictatorships. And the Swedish situation is a little more interesting because of the involvement of the royalty over time. But I mean, the Swedish Freedom of Information Act is now over 200 years old and really quite a progressive idea and bit of legislation, and that has been a country which has managed to preserve itself against the grosser forms of dictatorship for a long time. So we only see genocides when everyone in a country has sort of been swept up into the same direction that the power groups in the country have. And if there's a healthy, vibrant ability to communicate the opinions of minorities into the majority, then we're less likely to see that, and that is part of what being a resilient society is all about.
Thank you. There's one question over here.
Well, speaking of Sweden, I'm from Sweden and advisor to the Green Group, Erik Josefsson. This is getting late now, so I just wanted to connect to one of the two first comments or questions by Joe McNamee from ADLE and Jeremy Zimmerman from La Quadrature regarding ACTA. And we see in that proposal clearly that liability of intermediaries, ISPs, are increased. So new forms of liability is created by criminal language on inciting and abetting copyright infringement, for example. And then also a weakening of the current protection from liability that ISPs have. Now we have not talked that much about the infrastructure layer here, but actually I think WikiLeaks is on the internet, and the Great Firewall of China has been mentioned. Encryption has been mentioned. Maybe this is not a question, but I would like to draw attention to that liability on intermediaries can be profoundly change the circumstances for where free speech is happening. And I think the European Parliament's resolution on ACTA mentions that too, that there should be impact assessments on ACTA also when it comes to consequences of this increased liability on free speech. And maybe that's more a question or a comment that the MEPs in the panel could comment on, and particularly Mr. Lansdorff, who mentioned the charter where it said that to impart and receive information without interference of a public authority, that's all fine, but when that interference could be made by a private party, since ISPs are private companies, can they liability be extended so that we can see maybe even defamation cases be brought into a filtering regime, as we already see that copyright is sometimes used to stifle freedom of speech and is used to repress opinions. Thanks.
Thank you for the comments. I think your comments need to be addressed to many people in this parliament, but not necessarily our group. I want to say something funny, which is, also listen to our expressions freely expressed, because we've really addressed this issue actively. We are engaged in it. We share your concerns. So I could talk about this for a very long time, but I don't know if that's necessary now. We have one other person who wants to ask a question that has to be the last question, because I think we could talk for a long time, but let's do so outside. But yes, ACTA, it has been of great concern for us. Who is responsible for cutting off flows of information, or can be made responsible for cutting off flows of information? Where does it leave access, the right to access to information? I'm with a political party, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Dutch political party I belong to, called D66, which has said that access to information in the internet is a fundamental right. So I mean, that sort of shows you where we come from. So I think this is a discussion that we need to have in a vigorous manner, where again information needs to be more broadly shared also by people in the European Parliament, because if fake medicine and batteries that can explode or that can jeopardize our security or safety are put in one pile with downloading, then we're not having the right kind of discussion, in my opinion. And then within that avenue of a discussion, there are all kinds of remarks to be made, but I do think that there would be a lot to say to change the entire scope and perspective and outline of the whole discussion, so that we're actually talking about the right kind of problems and suitable solutions. So if, oh, sorry, Julian, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would like to ground this argument a bit by an example that I have dealt with too. The first is that ACTA first came to public awareness because we leaked a copy of the draft bill. So once again, I hearken back to that all rights and democratic debate comes out of the ability to communicate knowledge. And that's an example with ACTA itself, that it was someone communicating knowledge against strictures in the EU to us that then allowed that debate to happen. In relation to attacks on intermediaries, that is a very serious issue. The internet does not give anyone freedom of speech. The internet makes publishing cheap, and that allows more publishers to exist on the internet. However, freedom of speech is something, and freedom of communication is something that people bring to the internet through their behaviour. So we dealt with a case in the Turks and Caicos Islands, which is a tourism tax haven in the Caribbean of about 30,000 people. And the Premier was alleged to be selling off Crown land to Turkish and other multi-millionaire property developers for 1 cent on the dollar, following bribes, including a $500,000 cash payment to him and multi-million-dollar interest-free loans to other members of cabinet. An investigation was then set up, campaigned for and pushed for politically by a journal called the Turks and Caicos Islands Journal, which published on the internet, a very small journal, non-profit, and also including other groups. Eventually that was brought to the attention of the FCO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the UK, who has a defence and constitutional protection relationship with the Turks and Caicos Islands. Legally, it's technically a British overseas territory. It's internally independent, has its own parliament, but has a defence relationship like Bermuda. A report was then produced. Legal action was taken by the property developers to suppress the most important contents of that report. It was done so, it was injuncted, a redacted version was released, we published the unredacted version, and eventually, uniting with others, managed to defeat that injunction. But the journal concerned, that little publishing journal, the best used case of the internet, a little group of investigative journalists and civil society activists publishing the Turks and Caicos Islands Journal, they were hounded from one end of the earth to the other via attacks on intermediaries. So they were hounded out of the Turks and Caicos Islands and they went to India to publish from servers in India. Correspondent lawyers from Shillings were hired in the UK who hounded them out of that internet service provider through legal threats, which meant that they were no longer a profitable client to that internet service provider. They then went to Malaysia. Same thing happened in Malaysia. They then went to Japan. From Japan, they went to the United States. In the United States, the internet service provider held up a bit longer, but they were using Gmail for their editor's address. And this harkens back to the anonymity that while most of the writers for that journal were named, the editor was unnamed, presumably for legal reasons. But their email address at Google's Gmail was named. A suit was then filed in California based on defamation was the allegation. However, the suit was just used to then launch a subpoena on Google to get hold of the editor's correspondence. And we became involved legally and managed to defeat that, but that goes on. So that's what happens when you're a little publisher, a best use case of the internet, you try and write about something serious. You are hounded from one end of the earth to the other via attacks on intermediaries. The first 4 cases, attacks on the server intermediaries that are helping publish, and the last attack on Google, an intermediary that provides email access. So serious business.
Thank you. I don't have a question. It's just the same suggestion I made earlier in the panel. I feel strongly about it. I think the European Parliament might do good if they create a debate where examples are shown and examples are exposed of people who do express themselves, but in a fearless manner. They do express themselves on sensitive issues, but are not afraid of society or other retaliation attacks. I think I'd like to also emphasize what Marietje said on resilience. There's a lot of resilience out there. There's also a call for resilience. Freedom of speech is not just protected by the law or by writers who utilize the freedom of speech, but a lot of people in society are resilient. Just to give an example, in Holland I put up a book club for Muslim women to get them reading and writing, and they read just normal literature, not literature which is provocative, but just normal literature, which opens their minds and which makes them resilient, and they communicate that resilience back to their communities. Now these women say that they're never heard. They just, whenever some Muslim feels provoked, is angered, that Muslim is heard, but they are never heard. So I think we should expose also these elements of resilience in society and examples in society where people have been able to express without fear. Thank you.
I'm sorry about last questions, but I think we should really end the official part of this. Oh, okay, well then.
The answer might be long.
I'm Pete Blakemore. I'm a UK freelance journalist. This is for Professor Mullis. You seem determined to deny that libel tourism is a problem in London. Can you provide figures for cases that would qualify as this and that were thrown out of the UK courts? Or were they injuncted?
Can I provide figures, accurate figures? No. Secondly, you will not get an injunction to prevent a threatened libel, because essentially it's impossible. No court will issue one.
Thank you.
Privacy, yes.
So, very quickly, I would like to once again thank all the speakers for their courage to be here, to be confronted with difficult questions, to share their personal stories, and to participate in a long, active, but for us very enlightening and informative, inspiring debate to look for best practices, to create a resilience, but also a legal framework which covers and makes Europe, which is my ambition, a safe haven for the free word and the press, also online. So once again, thank you, and please be invited outside for a reception to have informal talks. Thanks.